These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The hidden history of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at CozyEarth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This is from the introduction, titled The Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its two owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like. The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre, not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled Australia, There Will Be Blood, the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations plus Australia, an American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides, 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms, a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the third highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name: the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control. With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy, and it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long. None of these measures would confiscate firearms or stop Americans from using guns for hunting, sport shooting, antique collecting, or legitimate self-defense.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. It is Tuesday, the 26th of April, and we've got a lot to talk about today. In our first hour, I want to get into this question of did Jared Kushner sell out America and world peace in exchange for $2 billion? And why is it that nobody seems to care? Also, are we being prepared for war and nobody's talking about it or even realizes what's actually going on here? I want to get into those two questions in our first hour. In our second hour, Ron DeSantis has signed into law has signed a new law creating the first voter fraud police force in Florida since the Ku Klux Klan stopped doing that job. We'll talk about that in our second hour. And also, Sean Hannity, this dump of text messages that CNN has laid their hands on somehow. Adam Schiff is insisting it did not come from the committee, but anyhow, they've got all these Mark Meadows text messages. Suggests that Sean Hannity was actually part of the Trump campaign while he was on Fox News. Remember when Keith Olbermann got suspended for simply writing a check to Gabby Giffords for $2,700 as a campaign contribution? Anyhow, we'll get into that in the second hour. And in our third hour, Ari Rabin-Havt is going to drop by. He's got a new book out, On the Road with Bernie Sanders. It's titled The Fighting Soul. And Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, finally gave justice to America's first black Secret Service agent who served with a presidential detail. Lamar Waldron and I have been pounding this issue for literally over 20 years. We've had Abraham Bolden on this program, and I'll tell you all about that in the third hour of the program. This was, finally a terrible, terrible injustice that literally tracks back to the Kennedy assassination that has been solved. So we'll get into that in the third hour of the program. But I wanted to open with my daily rant today from HartmannReport.com. We're now calling them daily takes. It sounds a little more dignified. And it's titled, Did Jared Kushner Sell Out America and Prospects for World Peace for $2 billion and Nobody Cares? Back in the 1960s, after Kennedy left office, I believe it was the early 1970s when Richard Nixon controlled Congress, because Kennedy had appointed his brother, Bobby, as Attorney General, because President Kennedy had appointed his brother as AG. Republicans, when they got power, when they finally got control of the White House and the Senate, they passed a law saying nepotism in the executive branch is now illegal. There are already anti-nepotism laws, throughout the federal government. If you're the head of tax collections at the IRS, you can't hire your brother to be your assistant or something. There's already anti-nepotism laws. But these were very specific. This was to the executive branch. So when Donald Trump became president, wanted to put Jared Kushner in charge of Middle East policy, in other words, a high-level position in the White House, sort of like, Bobby Kennedy, they had to ask the Department of Justice, is this legal? And the Department of Justice was like, well, we don't care. I mean, really, are you going to ask Bill Barr if it's, if something's a crime? Really? This was before Bill Barr, but the same thing. This was Trump's DOJ. So he put Jared in charge, and what does Jared do? Well, at that time, in 2017, Saudi Arabia was run by a guy named Prince Mohammed bin Nayef, also known as MBN, Mohammed bin Nayef. And his father, who was Nayef bin Abdul Aziz, was the former leader of Saudi Arabia. And his father's father, King Abdul Aziz, was his grandfather. So the guy running the country, his father had run the country before him, his grandfather before him. But he had a cousin by the name of Mohammed bin Salman who was salivating at the possibility of ejecting the current, reigning monarch, as it were. And now that Jared had a security clearance, Trump tried to get a security clearance for Jared. They ran the process. They came back and they said, no way should you give this guy a security clearance. He is corrupt. He is compromised. His father went to prison. There's a criminal history in his family. You should not be doing this. And Trump said, that's okay. I'm not only going to give him a security clearance, I'm going to give him the top secret, the highest you can get security clearance, because he's working right next to me and I've got, the ultimate security clearance. And so now Jared has access to the information that in Saudi Arabia, this young prince, Mohammed bin Salman, wants to overthrow his cousin who's running the country. And Jared makes this secret trip to Saudi Arabia and hangs out with Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, as it was reported in the Washington Post by, let me just track this down here. I'm missing the guy's name. Yeah, here it is. This was David Ignatius in the Washington Post. This was right after Mohammed bin Salman staged basically a palace coup, put the MBS, put MBN in prison, where he is to this day, and started arresting all kinds of members of the royal family and tossing them in jail in a fancy hotel. And David Ignatius of the Washington Post writes, quote, it was probably no accident that last month Jared Kushner, Trump's senior advisor and son-in-law, made a personal visit to Riyadh. The two princes are said to have stayed up until nearly 4 a.m. several nights, swapping stories and planning strategy. Right. So now, with Jared's help, and the help of U.S. intelligence, apparently, although Jared denies it, but Vicki Ward, who's done some really great reporting on this, she just reported, quote, 4 well-placed sources say the primary reason Kushner has now received $2 billion is that he helped MBS depose MBN, knowing that this went directly against what U.S. intelligence wanted or thought was good for national security. Just to be clear, MBN, the guy who had, who and his father and his grandfather had been running Saudi Arabia, was a longtime friend of the United States and was in tight with the U.S. State Department, U.S. intelligence. MBS, the guy who's now running Saudi Arabia, is, according to some news reports, moving Saudi Arabia closer to Russia and China. Once MBS took over, Donald Trump cut a deal with him to reduce the oil production of Saudi Arabia by 2.2 million barrels a day, which is, consequential. This was back during the pandemic when the price of oil was $35 a barrel. They were trying to raise the price of oil, help out the Texas oil men. We were having bankruptcies across Texas and Oklahoma. So Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, he says, okay, we'll cut our production. Well, now, and the production is still cut. Now Joe Biden is reaching out to him saying, hey, can you go back to the production like it was before Trump cut that deal with you? And MBS is refusing to take his phone calls. Instead, he's hanging out with Vladimir Putin, or at least talking to him. Which raises the question. I mean, here you've got Jared Kushner. His claim to fame was that he was a slumlord and his dad was a professional grifter who went to prison. Trump pardoned him, by the way. When his dad went to prison, this PR consultant, as a family friend, said, this is according to his father, said, quote, step one, this is his advice to young Jared now that his dad's in prison. Step one, buy a New York newspaper. Step two, don't be too particular. Any newspaper will do. Step two, buy a big Manhattan building. Any building will do. Step three, marry the daughter of a rich New York family. Anyone will do. So he buys a building just a few blocks down the street from Trump Tower, gets Donald Trump's attention, starts dating his daughter, and the rest is history. Which raises the question, there is this thing in the Constitution called the Foreign Emoluments Clause. Now, keep in mind, Jared Kushner was a White House official, officially. And the Emoluments Clause, which is in Article 1 of the Constitution, says, quote, no person holding any office of profit or trust under the United States shall, without the consent of Congress, accept of any present emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state. It looks to me like Jared Kushner sold out his country, broke the law, broke the Constitution, and damaged prospects for peace in the world by helping MBS rise to power and then pushing Saudi Arabia toward Russia just to get his hands on a few $1 billion. Isn't this at least remotely worthy of a Benghazi-style congressional investigation? Isn't this more important than Hillary's emails? Isn't this something the Department of Justice should be looking into? What am I missing here? Speaking of MBS and war, I want to talk about war right after this break. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
16 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, talk media for the sane among us. And welcome back. Paul in Lucerne, California. Hey, Paul, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to bring up a quick topic. 15 boxes of top secret materials at Mar-a-Lago. Did Jared have anything to do with that?
Well, that's a good question. That's a really good question.
I need to get them started. I couldn't get all of what he wanted. And another thing, remember when Khashoggi got murdered? During the murder, there was a phone call placed from the embassy to the White House. And it lasted about how long it took the guy to die, about a half hour?
I don't know. I don't recall that. I'll have to look it up. Now, the embassy was in Turkey, you mean from the Saudi embassy in the United States to the White House, or from the Turkish Saudi?
No, from Saudi, from where he was killed, from where the murder happened.
Really?
A phone call was made to the White House, and it lasted about 32 minutes. And there's some speculation that did they actually listen into the phone call? I think they did.
Who's they?
Trump and
Kushner?
Jared Kushner.
What if the phone call was from the Saudi embassy to Kushner?
What? Yes, it was. Well,
You mean, so you're speculating that Jared Kushner listened in on the murder of Khashoggi?
I'm pretty sure he did.
I think that's pushing it.
I think
so. that, you know...
Why did the phone call why did they make that phone call? Why did it last so long? Why was it coincidentally at the same time the guy's being murdered, they're on the phone?
Yeah, well, Paul, I can't speak to it. I don't recall that happened. I mean, it's entirely possible.
About it.
So go ahead.
The New York Times wrote an article about it. I tweeted about it. I've been on this story since I first heard it, and I think that these people are evil. They're not evil like we think they're evil. They're evil like movie evil.
Yeah, I'm trying to Google this while we're talking.
Dr. Evil plot. I'm serious. They want to take the world over.
Let me just see if there's Saudi Crown Prince disparaged slain journalist in call.
Okay.
Paul, if you can send me a link to that, I would love to see it. I'm
going to send you a link to it. I just got my glasses right now, and I'm firing up my phone. I'll send it to your DM on your Twitter account.
Okay, thank you. And I'll check that out during the break at the bottom of the next hour, or at the bottom of this hour. Another 15 minutes, and then if it checks out, I'll talk about it on the air. But that's pretty breathtaking. I just can't imagine that Jared Kushner would say, yeah, let me hear him being tortured. I would think it would be more like, how are we going to deal with the PR fallout from this or something like that if it happened.
I think Trump just did it just to hear a journalist die because he hates him so much.
So you think it was Trump, not Kushner?
I think it was both of them. These people, they kill stuff for fun. They do.
Yeah.
They sport hunt. They kill innocent animals and do all kinds of gnarly stuff for fun.
Well, the Trump kids certainly do. You're right. Elephants and giraffes and things, lions.
For fun.
Yeah.
I mean, he walks in on women getting dressed for fun.
Yeah. Well,
I'll get that.
That may be a slightly different thing, but I totally get what you're saying. Paul, thank you. Thank you for the call. Let me see what I can learn about this during the break here at the bottom of the hour. I want to talk about another topic altogether in just a moment, which is I think we're being prepared for war. I'll fill you in just a moment. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. I don't know if you caught this, but there was a piece of legislation before the House of Representatives that explicitly required the U.S. State Department to preserve any evidence of war crimes committed by the Russian forces in Ukraine, to gather reports of it, to preserve it, presumably in anticipation of some sort of a war crimes prosecution. And for reasons I can't quite figure out, maybe you have an idea, 6 Republicans voted against this. No, we don't want the war crimes of the Putin administration to be. Thomas Massey from Kentucky, Scott Perry from Pennsylvania, Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, Warren Davidson from Ohio, Andy Biggs from Arizona, and Paul Gosar from Arizona. I'm scratching my head here. Why would these 6 Republican politicians not want us to preserve the war crimes evidence? There's a video about this that you can see over at thomhartmann.com. So the other topic that I wanted to bring up is this question, why is nobody looking into Jared Kushner? I mean, you can bet that if the Republicans take the House back in January, there's going to be 100 investigations into every, Hunter Biden's laptop and every time a Democrat sneezed. But the other thing that it suddenly hit me last night. I was watching TV. Louise and I were watching TV, actually with one of our kids, and they were doing this reporting on the ground from Ukraine. And I got this incredible feeling of deja vu. You ever get these, like you're watching a show and it's like, I've seen this before. And it suddenly hit me. I remember in the mid-1960s, I'm talking 65, 66, maybe even 64, I remember being told how terrible the North Vietnamese were. How they were communists and they were committing atrocities and they were trying to take down South Vietnam, blah, blah, blah. You recall Vietnam was partitioned when, I believe it was when the French failed in their attempt to seize the country. And I then also remembered, so, we were prepared for the Vietnam War back in the 60s. And those of you old enough to remember know what I'm talking about. And then in 2003, and throughout the entire year of 2002, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney tried to prepare us for the war in Iraq. We were being sold a war. And the pattern, the way that they go about this is pretty straightforward, and part of it is actually organic. I mean, the news media is like doing all kinds of specials from the point of view of our side. And it just hit me. Just really hit me when my grandfather came to the United States in 1917. I don't know if he got drafted or if he volunteered, but off he went to World War I. When my father was in high school, Franklin Roosevelt was selling World War II to Americans, and the Republicans were very opposed to it. Oh, no, we don't want to have a war. Mr. Hitler is fine. We can do business with Mr. Hitler. So in my grandfather's lifetime, we were sold a war. And by the way, Woodrow Wilson hired Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud's nephew, this was literally the birth of modern public relations, to sell World War I. And you can argue it was a noble war. I'm not going to make that argument. I'm very ambivalent about World War I. World War II, we had to stop the Nazis. No doubt in my mind about that. It was what you might call a good war. But we were sold that war too, over strong opposition in the United States. You had Charlie Lindbergh out there, with his America First movement going, no, we need to take care of Americans first. And then we were sold the war in Vietnam, and then we were sold the war in Iraq. And now it seems to me that we're being sold a war in Ukraine. Now, let me be very clear about this. I think our involvement in the war in Ukraine is more like World War II than it is like Vietnam or Iraq. In other words, we're on the good side. I think Russia is taking the position with regard to Iraq that we took with regard to Russia is taking the position with regard to Ukraine that we took with regard to both Iraq and Vietnam. In other words, we were the aggressors. We were breaking international law. We were violating international norms, and we got sold that. Russia is now trying to sell this war to their people the way that George W. Bush and Lyndon Johnson lied us into the wars in Vietnam and Iraq. So I confess to a very, very high degree of ambivalence about this. In other words, I'm seeing that we're being sold a war, essentially. And I'm thinking probably it's an appropriate war, which I never thought I would say. I never thought I would see that in my lifetime. I thought World War II was the end of that kind of thing. Or am I going all warmonger here? But it sure seems to me like, and now, Russia's talking about nuclear wars, and and Lloyd Austin is like, that's not useful conversation. How is this going to play out? Where do you think this is going to go?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Oh, and then there was Daddy Bush. He lied us into the first war with Iraq, they're taking babies out of incubators when it wasn't true. It was a lie. For the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better by Maya Chenwar, who is, or was, I believe she still is, the publisher, or the editor, rather, over at truthout.org. This is from the introduction, the very beginning of the book. She uses a word I can't say on the air. I'll replace it with the word damn. Damn, 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 damn. I'm crying with my mother over the phone. It's late evening, December 25th, 2012, and Kayla, my only sister and best friend, has been arrested for the 7th time in the past 6 years. She's in jail again, and this time we're sort of hoping she'll stay there. If she asks, I tell Mom, I'm not bailing her out. Well, you know, we're not, Mom says, her voice low and far away, a weary echo of words uttered in months and years past. If she's in there, at least she'll be safe. Jail, we agree, may be the only place that can save Kayla's life, staving off her burning dependency on heroin. Neither of us acknowledges that regardless of whether Kayla stays clean while incarcerated, sooner or later she'll be getting out. Do we know what she's in for, I asked Mom. Does it matter? I think of Kayla cuffed and listless, being dragged through the doors of the Cook County Jail, catching the eyes of women she's known before in court, on the street, in juvenile detention, in jail, in prison. I wonder whether a part of her is relieved to be back. Later, when I pick up the phone and hear a robotic voice announce, you have a collect call from the Cook County Jail, press 5 to take the call, I press the hang-up button and get into bed. My attitude toward Kayla's incarceration was born out of desperation. She'd overdosed 3 times within 2 months, passing out on the street, awakening in abandoned buildings or crowded hospitals, her pulse barely ticking. Yet my wish chafed against not only my love for her, but also my politics, my ideals, my sense of justice and truth. After all, I run a social justice-based news organization and have denounced the colossus that is the prison industrial complex for as long as I can remember. For nearly a decade, I've corresponded with a number of people in prison as both interviewees and pen pals, and I've learned much from them about the violence and hopelessness of our system. My understandings of the power structures that create prisons have been guided by the work of people like activist and scholar Angela Davis, a staunch prison abolitionist. How could I reconcile my wholehearted opposition to the prison industrial complex with a desire to see my own sister locked up? When I look back on that time, I can only comprehend it by acknowledging the insidious, persistent role that prison occupied in my mind. It was closely connected to the role it occupies in larger society. Incarceration serves as the default answer to many of the worst social problems plaguing this country. Not because it solves them, but because it buries them. By isolating and disappearing millions of Americans, more than 2.3 million right now, making us the most incarcerated country on the planet, prison conveniently disappears deeply rooted issues that society, or rather those with power in society, would rather not attend to. Prison, writes Angela Davis, performs a feat of magic. As massive numbers of homeless, hungry, unemployed, drug-addicted, illiterate, and mentally ill people vanish behind its walls, the social problems of extreme poverty, homelessness, hunger, unemployment, drug addiction, illiteracy, and mental illness become more ignorable, too. But, as Davis notes, prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. And the caging and erasure of those human beings, mostly people of color and poor people, perpetuates a cycle in which large groups of people are cut off from mainstream society and denied the freedoms, opportunities, civil dignity, and basic needs that allow them a good life. In many jails and prisons, incarcerated people are tossed into a dank, dungeon-like solitary confinement cell when they are determined to have misbehaved. It's dubbed the hole. Isolated and dark, it shuts out almost all communication with fellow prisoners on the outside. Guards control the terms of confinement and the channels, if any, by which words can travel in and out. The hole presents a stark symbol of the institution of prison in its entirety, which functions on the tenets of disappearance, isolationism, and disposability. The solution to our social problems, the mechanism that's supposed to keep things together, amounts to destruction, the disposal of vast numbers of human beings, the breaking down of families, and the shattering of communities. Prison is tearing society apart. This country's most marginalized communities bear the overwhelming brunt of that devastation, but ultimately we are all caught up in the destruction as the politics of isolation ruptures the human bonds that could otherwise hold together a safer, healthier, and more just society. The behemoth that encompasses the prison is called by many names. Most meaningful ones, I think, are those that convey the pervasiveness of its power, the way it infects the world outside as well as the people within. Scholar and activist Beth Ritchie uses the term prison nation, describing it as, quote, a broad notion of using the arm of the law to control people, especially people who are disadvantaged and come from disadvantaged communities, end quote. That control can take the form of prisons, jails, surveillance, policing, detention, probation, harsh restrictions on child guardianship, the militarization of schools, and other strategies of isolation and disposal, particularly deployed against poor communities of color, especially black communities. Others have used prison nation simply to demonstrate the system's vastness, how it infiltrates our culture and fuels our national politics, often in invisible ways. Prison industrial complex, PIC, is another key term. Rachel Herzing of the prison abolitionist group Critical Resistance defines it. And then she goes on through this. It's an extraordinary book. Locked Down, Locked Out by Maya Shen. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Peter Strzok is tweeting, coming soon to Russian state media, Comrade Senator Paul. This is interesting. He says that August 2018 trip to Moscow to give Putin a letter from Trump and Deripaska's investments in Kentucky paid off well. Funny how he's also led the charge to scale back USIC authorities who could be used against Russia. Peter Strzok, of course, was the guy in the FBI who was in charge of counter-espionage or counterterrorism or whatever it was, relative to Russia, who Donald Trump drove out of the FBI. But this conversation just happened like 20 minutes ago between Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky, who did in 2018 personally hand deliver a letter from Trump to Putin. Went to Russia to do it. Rand Paul is saying is drawing a line in the sand. I mean, there is a simple reality here. If Ukraine joins NATO, there's a very real possibility American soldiers will be fighting Russian soldiers in Ukraine. Nobody wants to say that out loud, but it's a very real possibility. Is that a just war? Is there such a thing as a just war? My sense is that either the United States stands for countries' territorial integrity or we don't, on the one hand. On the other hand, we blew up, 2 countries, one of them twice in my lifetime, illegally, the same way that Russia is going after Ukraine. So, we have a kind of morally ambiguous position here. But just listen to this interaction. This is just 1 minute and 4 seconds. This is basically, this is Rand Paul interrogating our Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, and saying he doesn't want U.S. troops there, and then going on to pitch Vladimir Putin's point. Yesterday some idiot called up and was like, Putin's doing this because NATO is on its border. And I'm like, no, Putin's doing this because he's trying to get the band back together. These countries used to be part of the Soviet Union. And he wants them now to be part of Russia. He's trying to create greater Russia. And he has said so. Well, here's Rand Paul, a United States senator, taking Russia's side in this. Just listen to this. This is just breathtaking. It starts out with Senator Paul.
Had they been or are they to become part of NATO, that means U.S. soldiers will be fighting in Ukraine, and that's something I very much oppose.
Here's Anthony Blinken.
Say to that because look, these are important conversations and arguments. My judgment is different. If you look at the countries that Russia has attacked over the last years, Georgia, leaving forces in Transnistria and Moldova, and then repeatedly Ukraine, these were countries that were not part of NATO. It has not attacked NATO countries for probably very good reasons.
You could also argue the countries they've attacked were part of Russia.
There you go.
They were part of the Soviet Union.
Yes, and I firmly disagree with that proposition. It is the fundamental right of these countries to decide their own future and their own destiny.
And I'm saying it's not, but I'm saying that the countries
this
that
is
have
Rand
been
Paul.
attacked, Georgia and Ukraine, were part of the Soviet Union.
And that
And they were
Russia
part
had
of
the right
the
to
Soviet
attack.
Union since the 1920s.
But that does not give Russia the right to attack them. On the
No
contrary,
one's saying it does, but
they
it
were
really
from being part of this empire by force. Look,
Yeah, Paul says, nobody says it does, but he just said it does. So, interesting. Very interesting. All righty, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. A lot to talk about. Matt in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Matt, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how about comparing with the Korean War, where there was a major power just over the border? The major power had already invaded, had a veto on the Security Council, but I believe was boycotting the Security Council, so it went through.
The major power at that time being China?
China, right? Not as established as Russia. It was young as a communist country.
Right. And
But
poor.
I think that if we look at the Korean War, we might be able to figure some things out about the Ukraine situation. I don't know. I'm just suggesting it. That's all.
Well, the Korean War was resolved before I was old enough to remember anything. I mean,
Yeah, me too.
So I have no personal recollection of it. But my wife's uncle fought in the Korean War and came back and was horribly scarred by it. I mean, psychologically, and I'm. I've heard these stories from other people of that age, my father's age, that the Korean War was hell on wheels. It was just a terrible, terrible, terrible war. And Harry Truman lost the election. Well, actually, he didn't even run for re-election in 1952 when Dwight Eisenhower, the Republican, was elected, because that war in South Korea was such a disaster. In fact, the main sales pitch for Dwight Eisenhower when he was running for president was, vote for Eisenhower, vote for peace. Now, he wasn't saying peace generically. He wasn't talking about, I'm not going to start a war with the Soviet Union or something like that. He was, coming right out and saying in no uncertain terms that, he wanted to end the war in North Korea or in South Korea.
I think that everything you've just said is instructional regarding the Ukraine, because we could lose the election to Trump if Biden escalated things, or if Putin escalated things, and we got into Ukraine and everybody started worrying about that, and we may lose the election to Trump anyway. But I'm just saying, I think everything you said is right, spot on, and I think it maybe compares closely with the Korean War. I don't know.
Yeah. I suspect
I'm just a nobody. I'm not a professor or anything.
No, and I'm not a scholar of the Korean War, so I can't speak to that. But I do know that the Korean War became very, very unpopular. And in fact, Sean, this is coming out of my computer again. This is the actual campaign ad that President Dwight Eisenhower, or candidate Dwight Eisenhower, ran in 1952, or was this 48? No, 52. Yeah, and he was reelected in 56. This is the ad that Dwight Eisenhower ran, just as a candidate for peace.
He has met Europe's leaders, has got them working with us. Elect the number one man for the number one job of our time. November 4th, vote for peace. Vote for Eisenhower. A big bill.
Vote for peace. Vote for Eisenhower. I mean, that was his slogan in 1952.
My God, is that actually Eisenhower talking? He's shouting, isn't he?
No, that's an announcer. That's an announcer, and the visual of that was a cartoon of an elephant with a big drum, the kinds of marching drums like they have that hang off the front of you,
like the Carthaginian War or something.
Right, and he's beating the drum with a couple of drum, those things that you beat drums with, and the drum either says GOP or peace on it. I don't recall which, because I wasn't playing the video; I was just playing the audio. But anyhow, Matt, thank you for the call. It is a fascinating topic. Dale in Pensacola, Florida. Hey, Dale, your thoughts?
Hey, Tom. Just want to discuss what do you think is going to be the end game in Ukraine? Putin lose power, the reprisals between the Ukrainian people and the Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine. What's the end game there? Do you have any idea? Yeah,
my sense of it, and again, I'm not presenting myself as an expert on foreign policy, but I have been around the block a few times on this, and I'm a reasonably good observer of politics, is that Putin horribly miscalculated. He thought he could do in Ukraine what he did in Georgia, basically just roll in the tanks and everybody would just roll over. And Trump had softened them up. I mean, the Trump presidency was all preparation for this.
Absolutely.
So, in fact, Trump even withheld military aid to Ukraine as a part of his extortion attempt. So when it didn't go the way that Putin wanted, I think Putin is now in a position where he's close to having to either win the war or win a piece or take a piece of Ukraine and save face, or go out with a bang. And by bang, I'm talking about nuclear weapons. And I think that's why he's threatening them. I don't think he's threatening that he's going to nuke New York and Chicago. I think what he's threatening is that he's going to use battlefield nukes and he's going to turn Kyiv into cinders. That's my guess. And I think that Anthony Blinken putting, our ambassador from Slovenia, forgive me for not recalling her name. I just only learned it in the last 2 days. But apparently she's a really competent professional, ambassador, foreign diplomat. We're actually going to reopen our embassy in Kyiv, and she's going to go there. And that's a way of putting a flag in the ground, saying, we are really here. And then Lloyd Austin this morning, yesterday I said I think Lloyd Austin is going to walk back his statement that he wants to weaken Russia. He has been asked about it a dozen times. Everybody else perked up their ears just like I did when he said that. And he has now said, we have already weakened Russia, and we want to weaken them further. And like I said, that's fighting words for Russia. So this is all the stuff that causes me to think that we are being prepared for war. Now, the debate, I guess the question is that a good thing or a bad thing? If we don't stop Russia at Ukraine, they've declared now, a Russian general has declared they're going to go to Moldova. Another, Russian state television did a fairly lengthy show a couple of days ago saying that they should take the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. That's to the north of Poland. Moldova is to the south and southeast of Poland. I mean, obviously Poland is part of the old Soviet Union. What else is next? And so I'm of the opinion that this is much like, when Hitler took Poland in 1939, I believe it was, or 37. Everybody was like, he's just going to stop there. He just wants Poland. And, this was after he'd already annexed the Sudetenland. It doesn't work that way. Dale, I got to run, but thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
I don't think that Putin is going to stop with Ukraine. I don't think he's going to stop with Ukraine and Moldova. And frankly, I don't think he's going to stop with Ukraine, Moldova, and the Baltic states. And welcome back. Okay, let's see here. Gregory in Chicago. Hey, Gregory, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Mr. Hartmann. I am disappointed in Stephanie Miller and David Pakman, and who I love, and yourself, who I love as well, and all the progressive intellectuals in our country who are kind of falling into a bit of a groupthink, it seems, with saying that this invasion is not understandable from Putin, partly because, or mostly because of the horrific execution. And I
think it's easily understood. Putin told us what he wants to do. He said that Ukraine is not a country. It's not entitled to sovereignty, that it's part of Russia. Russia owns it. It's got a lot of Russian speakers in it. And even the Ukrainian language, Putin said, is not a genuine language. It's a bad dialect of Russian, and therefore Russia is going to reclaim their land. I mean, he was unambiguous about it, Gregory.
Well, that's all of the things that obfuscate the main trigger or red line.
Those are all the things that Putin
crossed.
said.
I know, but that's all a lot of static that it gets us not to see what was the trigger and the red line that was crossed. And I'm 62 years old, and I was 2 years, 9 months old with my grandparents in Detroit watching the Cuban Missile Crisis when we had I learned as I got older that we had placed missiles in Turkey and they were going to place them in Cuba, and they forced us to take them out of Turkey, which was revealed later, and then they didn't put them in Cuba, and we avoided nuclear war. I attended the European Nuclear Disarmament Conference in March of 1983 when I took a year off from Berkeley to go see which manages the weapons labs at Los Alamos. So I went to Europe to see what the millions of people...
These situations, Gregory, are not analogous.
Emmanuel Macron said we need a European security architecture that includes everyone, including
Putin
Russia.
has nuclear weapons on the border of Europe.
Right, but
so where's your outrage about that?
But the thing is that they asked to join NATO in 1949, the Politburo members, and they wouldn't let them join. They said, gee, this NATO thing is against us as a communist state, I guess. Then Putin asked Clinton to join in 2000. He asked George W. Bush to join in 2001.
Putin couldn't have asked Clinton to join because Putin was not running Russia when Bill Clinton was president.
He talked to him apparently before, and that's my understanding. Yeah. He asked George W. Bush. The Politburo members asked in 49.
What Russia did is they put together, after the fall of the Soviet Union, they put together their own version of NATO, and it's got a 4-letter acronym. It starts with C, and I'm sorry, I don't remember what the words are or what the acronym is, but they've got their own version of NATO. Belarus is part of it, and several other countries in the region are part of it. But the point is that this is not about whether there are weapons pointing from Russia at Europe or whether there are weapons pointing from Europe at Russia. This is about Putin trying to pull the band back together. He's trying to reunite the Beatles here, and it ain't going to work.
Anybody's attempt to create their own security is not supposed to take away from the security of someone else. When Gorbachev brought the Iron Curtain down, he and Reagan agreed that NATO would not expand 1 inch east of East Germany.
Actually, it was him and George W. Bush. And then George W. Bush made that statement. It was never backed up by any kind of negotiation. It was never backed up by treaty. It was never even written down. So I get it that, this is one of Russia's big talking points. But I would advise you, Gregory, to discard it because it is one of Russia's big talking points. We'll be right back. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. The recent killing of a young black man in Michigan, Patrick Loyola, who was, the police officer was sitting on his back and put a gun right to the back of his head and shot him, is just the latest example of police killing people out of traffic stops, and predominantly black people. 28% of the people who are killed in traffic stops are black, but African Americans are only 13% of our population. Police in the United States have killed nearly 600 people during traffic stops since 2017. Mapping Police Violence is the nonprofit that's been doing the work on this. About 10% just this year, about 10% of the 1,100 people killed by police this year have been killed at traffic stops. Dante Wright, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, we know their names and we know their stories, but we're not doing enough to get this under control. Other countries tend not to have this problem. We need to do something now. There's a video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 51 minutes past the hour. Is war in Ukraine that involves more than just Ukraine and Russia imminent? Number one. Number two, if it becomes a NATO war, should or will the United States become involved in it? Number three, is that a good thing or a bad thing for the United States or for peace around the world or for democracies around the world? And I guess a lot of that is predicated on the question, does Putin want to go beyond Ukraine? So, and a whole bunch of different people offering different thoughts on this. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, your thoughts?
Well, sure, Tom. The answer to your last question is, yeah, he already has gone beyond Ukraine. So
you mean with Transnistria and Georgia?
No, into this small country, Moldova.
Yeah, that's Transnistria. That's the part of Moldova that he owns.
Well, yeah. Okay, so I'm saying that the none of the three end games that you articulated with the previous caller can be tolerated. not at least of which is using a tactical nuclear weapon. And the reason is because if one is allowed, all three will be used. No question about it. And besides, you know...
You want to recap those three?
By the way, NATO was formed to stop Russian aggression. And here we stand by and allow Russian aggression. He'll move into everyone. Poland was part of NATO. Remember the Warsaw Pact? Warsaw's in Poland.
Yep.
Okay, so is Poland now back on? Is that fair game too? It will be not only the Baltic states of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. It will be the Baltics and the Balkans will all be back on Putin's list.
I think they already are.
He's a revanchist. He wants to recapture lost power.
I think they already are. I think he's pulling a Hitler here.
Absolutely. And you know what? Do we want to be the Neville Chamberlain that appeases him and says, "Oh yeah, go ahead and take the Sudetenland. We're okay with that. It's just a little thing. Just take." Because if he takes any part of Ukraine, he'll take. Well,
that's what he did. This is what the Neville Chamberlain moment was 2014 with Crimea.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, sure. You can say that. That's for sure. So we don't need to continue to make that mistake. And he will. And this points out why NATO is behaving is exactly what I've said on this program weeks ago. Is that our theory of nuclear deterrent is now being proved wrong. This mutually assured destruction crap is basically, it says if Putin has a nuclear weapon, he doesn't have to use it. He can just bludgeon you to death with his cudgel. His regular, traditional, what do they call them?
Battlefield nukes, tactical nukes.
No, not battlefield nukes. I'm saying he doesn't have to use a nuke. If he has them, he can use conventional weaponry to just beat the crap out of everybody. That's what we're watching. We are the NATO neighborhood watching somebody who doesn't live in our neighborhood get the crap kicked out of them by somebody else who doesn't live in this neighborhood too. Yeah. And we're just standing there going, oh, well, he doesn't live here, so, we really can't do anything. We are we can't, and Putin is taking that cue, and he is involved in genocide. Obviously, the graves that was on the news that they've just made a mass grave of 9,000 bodies. Right. This is Hitler.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And the question is America prepared to deal with this? I mean, again, this was this just sudden realization that I got last night. Oh my God, America is going to war. And
yes, your question: if NATO's involved, should America be involved? Yes, we're part of NATO. Otherwise, we say, oh, that's not good for us. I mean, do we all just chicken out because a revanchist dictator is going to start being aggressive? Yeah, we weren't ready for it, and the reason we weren't ready for it was because our misassumptions about what our nuclear deterrence really meant. And what Putin knows is what every other head of state knows, is that if somebody uses a nuclear weapon, we're not going to retaliate, because that does mean mutually assured destruction. So Putin knows that. Biden knows that. All of the heads of state in Europe know that. So that means we just have to let some bully run his course until he's when will he be satisfied? He won't be satisfied until he recaptures every one of the states that were part of the old Soviet Union.
Right. I agree with you. And I got to tell you, Paul, as a guy who, since my teenage years, has been anti-war.
Yeah, me too.
I find myself really swallowing hard on this one because, I remember conversations with my father about those stupid Republicans, and my dad was a lifelong Republican, but about those stupid Republicans who opposed the war when he was a little kid, when he was a teenager, who didn't want to take on Hitler because they thought, oh, we can work with Hitler, and why should America disrupt, and why all the sacrifice that's going to be involved, and it's that evil Franklin Roosevelt. And my dad was gung-ho to go off to the war. And I don't know. I think that 80-year cycle is coming back around again. Here we are, 80 years out from World War II, and we find ourselves once again facing basically worldwide fascism that wants to dominate the planet, or at least dominate a large chunk of Europe. And Paul, I got to run, but thank you for the call. We'll continue this conversation on the other side of the break, along with, a few other questions about Hannity and DeSantis and President Biden.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The hidden history of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at CozyEarth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.
Our book today is Future War, Preparing for the New Global Battlefield by Robert, I believe it's pronounced Latif, L-A-T-I-F-F. This is from the introduction. On a sweltering August day following weeks of heightened tension with Russia over its actions in Ukraine and Syria, and harsh words between the United States and China over actions in the South China Sea, and as workers are preparing to depart the cool of their air-conditioned Manhattan office buildings for the gridlocked highways and subways, several large electric power plants along the East Coast simultaneously experienced dramatic overspeed conditions in their large turbine generators. Plant operators are unable to stop the steam turbines, whose automatic control and data systems have been infected by sophisticated computer malware, and they catastrophically tear themselves apart, cutting power to large segments of the population and industries in the Northeast. Building systems shut down, hospitals switch to emergency generators, trains stop running, traffic lights cease operating, and Wall Street trading comes to a halt. At the same time, 1,100 miles to the south, a massive rocket sits fueled and ready to launch a critical national security satellite when an explosive-laden private aircraft flies at low altitude into the Cape Canaveral launch pad area and, despite repeated warnings, slams into the pressurized fuel tank and solid rocket motors, creating an enormous conflagration. Half a world away, elite commandos equipped with the latest high-technology equipment but unidentifiable as a national army attack U.S. and allied interests near areas of disputed territory. Thus are fired the opening shots of a new war. These hypothetical events represent a radically different style of conflict fought with new tools and against new and unfamiliar enemies. When most people think of war, they imagine soldiers doing battle with other soldiers, employing tanks, artillery, and other recognizable weapons. However, in this century, war has morphed into something we can scarcely recognize, and future conflicts will be qualitatively and quantitatively unlike those of the past. They will be fought using innovative and unusual weapons, many of which, because the technologies have both civilian and military uses, will be available to far more people who are far less skilled in their employment. The so-called democratization of technology has diminished the monopoly of advanced countries on the tools of war. 21st century armed conflicts often have no battlefield in the traditional sense. The concept of opposing armies clashing in deadly struggle but moderated by international conventions of behavior seems a thing of the past. In 1999, Chinese colonels Kuo Liang and Wang Shuangshui predicted that soldiers would increasingly be computer hackers, financiers, drug smugglers, and agents of private corporations rather than members of a military, and that their weapons would include not only airplanes, cannons, poison gas bombs, and biochemical agents, but also computer viruses, net browsers, and financial derivative tools. Their predictions were prescient. Yesterday's wars were, like World War II, about saving civilized nations from maniacal dictators, or like the conflicts in Vietnam and Korea, devoted to a clash of ideologies in the attempt to limit the spread of one hegemon over another. They were big affairs involving large military forces and enormous violence. Today's wars are more about cultural and religious hatreds, using violence as a means to change the hearts and minds of people, among whom the killing occurs with more frequency. Tomorrow's wars will be different still, fought largely for political dominance with stealth and cunning, targeting innocents and institutions, heavily dependent on information superiority, and employing strange new weapons. While we have a highly motivated and well-trained and equipped armed forces that will adapt, we are not prepared as a nation to react well to the inevitably messy and ambiguous situations these new conflicts and weapons will present. We still have no clear idea of what constitutes an act of war in cyberspace now, nor of how we might respond to such an act. It is not enough for the military to be prepared. Neither the public nor its decision makers have yet fully comprehended the significance of the changes in the types of conflict and the tools with which they will be fought. Without question, there will be circumstances when decision makers will find it necessary, or at least think it necessary, to send soldiers into classic boots-on-the-ground combat situations. We will continue to project force with our powerful aircraft, our munitions, and our aircraft carrier strike groups. When war is fought in foreign lands, it could well be against other high-tech armies. However, war will increasingly be more personal and often fought closer to home. It will not lend itself to the traditional massive displays of U.S. firepower. It will affect individuals directly, not as some distant conflict we read about in newspapers or watch in the movies or on the internet. Americans will be targeted on U.S. soil, often, as we have seen in San Bernardino and Orlando, by homegrown terrorists. This form of war will be messy and complex, and it will not lend itself to easy, quick, soundbite solutions. It may not even be clear for a while who perpetrated the violence against us. Was it state-sponsored or a random act of terror? Will we unleash massive destruction on foreign countries in retaliation for attacks by terrorists residing on our own soil? If so, to what end and with what consequences? There are always consequences, whether they be the death or capture of our own troops, unnecessary civilian casualties, or the incitement of more violence. The book Future War by Robert Latif.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll continue our conversation in just a moment about whether America should get involved in a war in Ukraine, as in American soldiers on the ground, whether that is the inevitable consequence, and whether that is a good war like World War II or a bad war like both Iraq wars, both Bush-backed Iraq wars or LBJ's Vietnam, or even if those are reasonable designations. Should we even be thinking of wars in these terms? Or is this the best way for us to think of wars? Obviously, we would like to have no wars, but we'll continue that conversation in just a moment. There are a couple of other stories in the news. Ron DeSantis just signed into law a new bill that would create the Office of Election Crimes and Security in Florida. Now, it used to be that voter fraud. They don't talk about election fraud in the Republican Party because that's what they practice, right? January 6th was an attempt to conduct election fraud. Now, instead, what they talk about is voter fraud, because voter fraud is about individual voters, and individual voters come in a whole bunch of different colors. Maybe you haven't noticed, but they do. There are white voters, there are Hispanic voters, there are black voters, there are, African American voters, the Asian voters, we have Native American voters. And it used to be that there was, down in Florida, a group of people who made sure that voter fraud didn't happen. That is to say, voter fraud is just Republican code for the wrong people voting. And that group that they used to have in Florida, they still have the group, but they used to enforce the voting laws in Florida, was called the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan. And the Klan is no longer enforcing the voter laws. They're not showing up at the polling places intimidating people. They may in the 2024 election, now that the Republican Party is trying to recruit 50,000 Klan members and others to show up, in the states where you can be armed. And now we're up to 26 states now where you don't even have to have a permit. You can just stick a gun in your pocket. You don't even have to tell anybody. Show up at the polls. But basically, now that the Klan's not doing the job anymore in Florida, Ron DeSantis has come up with his own little personal squad. The Campaign Legal Center last month said that this new partisan agency would open the door to voter intimidation and harassment. Gee, you think? It allows, right now, elections in Florida and in most parts of the country are conducted by nonpartisan officials. Now, in 19 or 20 or 21 states, that has changed, and specifically Republicans now control the election procedures in those states. These are all changes since Trump tried to overthrow the government. But generally speaking, they're nonpartisan people. Well, this would create an agency that is answerable only to DeSantis. His own personal little clan, or whatever you want to call it. Nikki Fried, the state agriculture commissioner, who is probably going to be running against DeSantis in the election. She's in a primary right now. She said the governor's election police is political theater at best and a deliberate barrier to voting and a huge waste of millions of taxpayer dollars at worst. What's particularly weird about this is that in 2020, DeSantis came out and said that the elections were fair in Florida. No voter fraud here. We got everything nailed down. Everything's great. So why do they need this new agency? Well, Brian Griffin, DeSantis spokesman, says it will serve as a powerful deterrent. Right. Number one. Number two, the other story I wanted to share with you, and then we'll get back to our conversation about war and peace. Remember when Keith Olbermann got suspended from MSNBC? Do you remember what caused it? A lot of people have forgotten. It's probably gone down the memory hole by now, but it was because he gave a $2,700 contribution, a donation, to Gabby Giffords in her campaign for Congress. He also gave a contribution to Raul Grijalva, they're both from Arizona, and to General Jack Conway, who was trying to replace Rand Paul. Rand Paul, the guy who just an hour ago was defending Russia attacking Ukraine by saying, well, Ukraine used to be part of the Soviet Union. So Olbermann lost his job over that, or at least got suspended without pay indefinitely for writing a check for $2,700 to these three candidates. And now we're learning from the text messages from Mark Meadows that back during the election, now this is not during January 6th, this is 2 months earlier, this is in November. On the afternoon of Election Day, Hannity texted Meadows and said, how's turnout going in North Carolina? Meadows responded, stress, every vote matters. Get out and vote. Yes, sir, Hannity replied. On it. Any place in particular we need to push? Mark Meadows responded, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada. Hannity replies, "Got it." Yes, sir? Got it? And Hannity is still on the air at Fox News? This says a whole lot, A, about the integrity at MSNBC and about the lack of integrity over at Fox News, and also, what the hell is going on? When people, primetime people who present themselves as news people, are coordinating with a presidential campaign on Election Day in a get-out-the-vote effort. There's something very, very, very wrong here. Just very wrong. By the way, I found my dad gave me this for my birthday, 20, 25 years ago, this book. It's by Rex Stout, who was, at the time this book was published, the most famous fiction writer in America. He had sold, at the time that this book was published, over 70 million books. Nero Wolfe was his principal creation. And the book is called The Illustrious Dunderheads by Rex Stout. And it's an incredible collector's item now. But just, these are all quotes from members of Congress. All right, these are quotes from Hamilton Fish from the Congressional Record. Hamilton Fish was a Republican from New York. "Let us stop this hysterical chatter about calamity and invasion that has been running rife these last few days. It is not fitting to the people who built this nation." This was on June 22nd, 1940. Hitler has already invaded Poland. Hitler is bombing England. Republican Congressman Fish goes on, "The only reason that we're in danger of becoming involved in this war is because there are powerful elements in America who desire to take part." He continues, "Let us have an end to the secret diplomacy and the secret commitments of President Roosevelt that have brought ruin and disaster to France." Keep in mind, France was then occupied by the Nazis. "And from which we have escaped only by a miracle and the will of the American people expressed through the Congress to keep America out of the war. President Roosevelt alarmed the nation by his inflammatory Italian dagger thrust to the heart speech." On August 5th, 1940, Hamilton Fish said, "Whom do we fear? Do we fear Hitler, who seems afraid to attack England over 20 miles of sea when he would have 3,000 miles to cross here? This is preposterous. Let us stop this fear hysteria." And then on September 3rd, as FDR was talking about the need for a draft, preparing for war, Representative Fish says, "Peacetime conscription in America is the direct road to Hitlerism, dictatorship, and National Socialism. If we adopt peacetime conscription, we are merely copying Nazi methods and ideology. We don't want to go to war." George Dondero, Republican from Michigan, September 4th, 1940. "What nation threatens this country? What nation is about to invade our country? We're not at war. No nation has even suggested or insinuated that we're about to become the object of its wrath unless we provoke it." It's just, this is every page of this book. This is from Fred L. Crawford, Republican from Michigan. This was on October 2nd, 1940. "The Southern Committee for Jeffersonian Democracy has made some very keen observations. This committee points out that Mr. Roosevelt has gained control of the National Democratic Party, using it as a front for the New Deal, as Herr Hitler gained control of what was once the National Labor Democratic Party in Germany. And the committee further observes that today both of these democratic parties, as exemplified by Roosevelt here and Hitler over there, have no resemblance in principle or purpose to the original party. I believe it is responsible to say that the United States will be forced by events now shaping themselves to decide between becoming an economic colony of Great Britain again or the official receiver of a probably bankrupt British Empire." It just goes on and on and on. This Fred Bradley, again, a Republican from Michigan. I don't know why. It's just random. I'm just opening random pages here in this book. If our president's leadership is failing us, what can we do? The truth is the New Deal needs war to shackle socialism on your backs. The New Deal needs war to blind you to the complete bankruptcy of its pretended restoration of prosperity. The New Deal needs war to make crushing taxation acceptable to the American people. These were Republicans. Here's John Anderson, Republican representative from California, 1941, August 5th. What strange bedfellows the present crisis has created. This bill for conscription is not only un-American, it is unpatriotic, undemocratic, and a draft is absolutely unnecessary. I am not so panicky as to worry about Hitler.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I am hearing an echo. I think it was, I'm not sure who said history rhymes. It doesn't just repeat itself, but I think it was Mark Twain. Welcome back. Let's see here. Trying to pick up some folks who have been on hold for a while. Vincent in Prescott Valley, Arizona. Hey, Vincent, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. How are you feeling?
I'm well. Knock wood.
Good.
So, what's up?
I wanted to bring up what the gentleman about 3 calls was talking about. Is there any justification for Russia doing what it's doing? What I see is the same line of tactics the U.S. has always used, which is ad hominem, find one man that's responsible for all the atrocities like Hitler, and put it in Putin. The historical data shows, and my dad was not a Republican, he was a union organizer, and he worked for people to better themselves. And he was a communist. And I said, hey, now that the Soviet Union is broken up, what's going to happen? He said, well, those countries next to the Soviet Union were always under the control of the Soviet Union, and they're really not suited for getting along with each other. And the only country keeping them from fighting each other was the Soviet Union. And now it's come to pass that these countries have been fighting each other, Bosnia, Herzegovina, all Eastern Bloc countries. And now we're believing that it's okay to go to war against Russia. What is your suggestion for a peaceful resolution to this?
I am increasingly of the opinion, I was going to say strongly, but I'm not quite strongly of the opinion yet, but I am increasingly of the opinion, Vincent, that the only, that Putin, a couple of stipulations. One, Putin is an absolute ruler of Russia. Nobody dares challenge him. He is as close to a dictator as a country can get. Number 2, he wants to restore the former Soviet Union, and he is willing to engage in mass slaughter and genocide to accomplish that, as we have seen. And not just in, obviously Grozny arguably was part of that notion, although, Chechnya is still within Russia, modern Russia. But, and I don't think you can make that claim about Aleppo, although you could, arguably you could, because Aleppo was all about protecting the Russia's naval fleet in Syria. But, with Ukraine, it's obvious that he's doing that. And being a sociopath and being a mass murderer, the only language that Putin understands is force. And so I'm increasingly of the opinion that we have to use force against him to stop him. And I mean, some kind of serious force.
Yeah. That's what was predicted by my father to me in conversation of political science.
Yeah, I can give you, there's a book called The Fourth Turning that Strauss and Howe wrote back in the 1990s that predicted that right around this time, there would be another war in the world. Now, they didn't say who, but they said we would be in another world war by 2020, by this time. And
one last point.
Yeah.
Because because the Soviet Union broke up, we got people that are capitalists like Putin. Soviet Union never should have broken up. And if Putin gets it back, it's not communism. The Soviet Union will not be communism. It'll be capitalism at its worst.
Yeah, I agree with the final point you made there, Vincent. Thank you. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Have you noticed that people are basically imitating Donald Trump all over the country? We're seeing all this rude behavior, sexist, racist behavior. People getting arrested at airport gates, airplanes being turned around because people are fighting with flight attendants, disorderly, rude, unhinged conduct. I mean, it's just gone nuts. Car crashes are up, gun deaths are up, shootings are up. Healthcare workers are being literally physically assaulted in some hospitals. They're having to put together panic buttons. This kind of behavior in our schools is increasing. It looks like, according to some sociologists, psychologists, and even business consultants, it looks like a lot of this ties back not just to the Trump presidency, with Donald Trump providing us with an example of how to be, an obnoxious person, but also the crisis of the pandemic. We've got a deeper dive into this topic over at ThomHartmann.com. There's a great video about it. You can check it out there. 24 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Kim in Santa Rosa, California. Hey, Kim, what's up?
Yeah, I was just calling because I do believe that we are getting ready to go into Ukraine. 2 Sundays ago on Meet the Press, I'm not positive, but I think it was Senator Coons made indication that I think the Senate is getting ready to okay the for us to go in there. I don't understand why we haven't done it sooner, because I believe we need to push Russia all the way back into Russia and take out those batteries that they're sending the long-range missiles in on. I think you're right, Kim, and here's how I see it playing out. We have not had an excuse to put soldiers on the ground in Ukraine. And we got that excuse yesterday, or maybe it was the day before yesterday, when, I believe it was yesterday, though, that Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said, we are going to reestablish, or maybe it was Biden, I don't know who made the announcement, but they've all referenced it, that the woman who is currently our ambassador to Slovenia is going to become, in short order, our ambassador to Ukraine, and we're going to reopen the embassy in Ukraine that Donald Trump closed in 2019 when he fired Marie Yovanovitch. He fired our ambassador and left Ukraine without an American ambassador for the last year of his presidency. And, we've had career diplomats there, but we have not had an ambassador in Ukraine since then. Once we have an ambassador and an embassy, that ambassador and that embassy are going to require security. Who provides security to embassies all around the United States? The United States Marine Corps. So correct. Now we've got boots on the ground in Ukraine. And if that embassy comes under attack, or the region around that embassy comes under attack, or if the president thinks he can build a good case that the region around the embassy, say the city of Kyiv, is on the verge of coming under attack, suddenly we've got an excuse to bring in, a whole bunch of military folks. And now you've got a ground war with U.S. soldiers on the ground in Ukraine. And I am not hoping for this, but I think it's a very real possibility, and maybe even a probability. And I think that we're being prepared for it, not in some horrible, oh my God, let's manipulate the American people way. But you can't take a country to war without explaining why you're going to do that. And we've been lied into 3 wars in the last 50 years or so. Frankly, I don't think we were lied into World War II. And I think this is probably more analogous to that than anything else. Kim, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We're talking about war and peace.
Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
For our book club today, we're reading Out of the Wreckage, A New Politics for an Age of Crisis by George Monbiot. This is from Chapter 3, Don't Look Back. The political history of the second half of the 20th century could be summarized as the conflict between its two great narratives, neoliberalism and social democracy. Social democracy in this era, whose story I briefly summarized in Chapter 1, acquired much of its power and coherence from the thinking of one remarkable man. Across 4 decades, John Maynard Keynes's work dominated economic thought and practice. During the period the French called the Trente Glorieuses, 1945 to 1975, his prescriptions are widely credited with reviving economies and distributing their benefits. That they remain more or less the only mainstream alternative to neoliberalism today reveals a remarkable stagnation of both thought and ambition. The first and most obvious problem with an attempt to use Keynesian social democracy as a core political narrative is that the story is more than 80 years old. Political stories need to be renewed. If politics does not feel fresh, it struggles to kindle the imaginative excitement from which hope arises. The second problem is that the surviving enthusiasm for Keynes among mainstream parties is highly selective. It has been reduced in most cases to lowering interest rates when economies are sluggish and engaging in tepid counter-cyclical public spending, which means injecting public money into the economy when unemployment is high or recession threatens. Other Keynesian measures, such as raising taxes when an economy grows quickly to dampen the boom-bust cycle, the fixed exchange rate system, capital controls, and a self-balancing global banking system, an international clearing union, all of which Keynes saw as essential complements to these policies, have been discarded and forgotten. Not only does this ensure that the rich old story has been reduced to 2 thin chapters, whose loss of context destroys their narrative power, but the absence of other Keynesian measures, as well as changed global circumstances, weakens the effectiveness of the remaining elements of policy. Let me give you an example. In 2009, in the hope of boosting the economy in the wake of the financial crash, the British government spent £300 million on stimulating sales of new cars. Under its scrappage scheme, if car owners traded in their old vehicles for new ones, the government, with the help of manufacturers, knocked £2,000 off the price. This lavish program was partly justified as an environmental measure, though it was clear from the outset that it would lead to a rise in environmental impacts as the materials and energies used in manufacturing new cars outweigh any likely savings from better fuel economy. Its primary purpose was to boost British car assembly plants and protect the jobs of their workers. But European state aid rules forbade such schemes from discriminating between cars made in Britain and cars made abroad. British car parts assembled only some 15% of the vehicles sold in that country, which meant that 85% of the benefit went to car plants in Germany, Japan, and other manufacturing nations. We could see this spending as foreign aid to some of the world's richest nations. The current pattern of globalization, which developed partly as a result of abandoning the fixed exchange rates and capital controls that Keynes advocated, ensures that this problem is to some extent repeated wherever Keynesian stimulus spending is applied. It might lead to a general, if scarcely detectable, global economic uplift, but the domestic impact will necessarily be weaker than Keynes intended. This issue is compounded by the phenomena of job-free growth, caused in part by the automation now spreading into almost every economic sector. Today, governments pull the starter cord, spending public money and cutting interest rates, that ignited the economy and employment in the past, only to discover that it snaps before the motor fires. 2 feeble measures, removed from the rich framework of thought and narrative in which they were once embedded, have little chance of sustaining a political revival. Another issue is that the troubles that beset the Keynesian model in the 1970s have not disappeared. While the oil embargo of '73 was the immediate trigger for the lethal combination of high inflation and high unemployment, called stagflation back then, that Keynesian policies were almost powerless to counteract, Problems with the system had been mounting for years. Falling productivity and rising costs push inflation, wages and prices pursuing each other upwards, were already beginning to erode support for Keynesian economics. Most importantly, perhaps, the program had buckled in response to the political demands of capital. Strong financial regulations and controls on the movement of money began to weaken in the 1950s as governments started to liberalize financial markets. Richard Nixon's decision in '71 to suspend the convertibility of dollars into gold destroyed the system of fixed exchange rates on which much of the success of Keynes's policies depended. The capital controls introduced to prevent financiers and speculators from sucking money out of balanced Keynesian economies collapsed. Today, it's hard to find a mainstream politician in Europe or the Anglophone nations, including those who call themselves Keynesians, prepared to call for their reintroduction. We cannot hope that the strategies deployed by global finance that helped to destroy the efficacy of Keynes's measures in the 70s will be unlearned. If the soft Keynesianism proposed by opponents of neoliberalism is to amount to anything but tinkering, it has to confront a wider set of challenges than most of its advocates have yet been prepared to acknowledge. But perhaps the biggest problem residual Keynesianism confronts in the 21st century is that when it does work, it collides headfirst with the environmental crisis. The book, Out of the Wreckage.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. The American Lung Association just came out with an amazing new study where they took Joe Biden's goal of a zero-emission power grid by 2035 and zero-emission passenger vehicles across the United States by 2035, which is a ways down the road, and trucks and buses being zero-emission by 2040, and said, okay, what will happen if we do this? They discovered that over 100,000 lives would be saved, people who wouldn't be getting cancer and COPD and asthma and all these kind of things. Over $1.2 trillion in public health costs would be avoided, and just massive, and 2.8 million fewer asthma attacks, among other public health problems. They note how extraordinary this would be, what a huge and positive impact it would have on America's public health, and how it's completely doable, the American Lung Association. The one note they say is that, quote, opposition from Republicans and 2 key Democratic senators makes it easier said than done. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back, 35 minutes past the hour. Rama Schneider, just the first producer of my program. He's a talk show host in Vermont. I don't know if he's still doing that, but he was when we knew him back in 2003 when we started this program. He helped us start the show. And he just tweeted something that I think is absolutely profound. And in fact, I liked it. I'm going to go ahead and actually retweet it to make it really easy for you to find. He said, I don't believe that NATO expanded east. Now, think about that for a moment. This is the big talking point. This is like, Rand Paul and all these guys, and I've, I occasionally get a caller from somebody who's like using this old Russian talking point of, oh, well, we've got to invade Ukraine because NATO was coming for us. They were moving west, or moving east, rather, toward Russia. So anyhow, back to Rama Schneider. He says, I don't believe that NATO expanded east. What happened was a number of nations recently freed from the yoke of Moscow ran to the west as fast as they could, which is absolutely true. NATO doesn't go knocking on people's doors. You've got to apply to be a member of NATO. NATO doesn't solicit membership applications. A country has to apply. There's a process that typically takes years. The country has to go jump through all kinds of hoops to meet their qualifications. And then all 30 NATO nations unanimously have to say, yeah, okay, we'll let them in. So it's not that NATO expanded to the east. It's that countries that had been freed from the Soviet Union, and make no mistake about it, I lived on the border with East Germany for a year in the 80s. I was in the Soviet Union when it was the Soviet Union. This was not what Karl Marx had in mind when he talked about communism. This was a dictatorship run by a small group of very, very wealthy oligarchs pretending to be party bosses, or, they actually were the party bosses. who kept millions of people basically in slavery. There's no other way to characterize what the Soviet Union was. Maybe, you know, the revolution, yeah, let's go back to 1917. Great ideas. Let's overthrow the Tsar. Let's have an egalitarian paradise. And I think some of the early thinkers involved in the Russian Revolution, the early communists, probably, well, not probably, from my read of history, you know, were just very, you know, we're embracing the highest ideals conceivable. But what happened when Lenin and then Stalin took over? The Soviet Union turned into an insane dictatorship. I mean, like right up there with Hitler's dictatorship. Stalin killed tens of millions of his own people. And so, yeah, these countries that were under his control, Poland was under Soviet control from 1945 until 1989, when Lech Walesa was leading the Solidarity movement. They finally broke free. I mean, the Soviet Union disintegrated the year later. 2 years later, I guess it was 91. So, anyhow, end of rant. Let's talk about, you know, what's going on here. Lori in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Lori, what's on your mind?
Hi, I'm going to take it off of speaker. Can you hear me?
I hear you just fine, Lori. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I am not anyone that thinks war is a good thing ever. I think going to war should never be a choice, but I believe right now we have no choice. I think this is all of NATO's never again moment. We have to completely eliminate Putin's threat of using nukes by defeating Putin. And I think Joe Biden is the single most capable person who happens to be our president to lead this charge. My fear is going to war means wartime corruption. I think Joe Biden will eliminate for-profit contractors. He's best suited to use war powers for the betterment of the country. You can get health care, vote by mail nationally, affordable higher education, all of the things that the country wants that other countries in NATO have. Joe Biden is best capable of implementing. I think this is the time. If we wait and someone like Trump gets in office, God help us all.
Amen. Now, this is what Franklin Roosevelt had to say during World War II. We were in the war, and about the issue that you just identified, Lori, war profiteering. And I'm hopeful that I can hear a similar speech from President Biden. This is Franklin Roosevelt.
Our present emergency and a common sense of decency make it imperative that no new group of war millionaires shall come into being in this nation as a result of the struggles abroad. The American people will not relish the idea of any American citizen growing rich and fat in an emergency of blood and slaughter and human suffering.
There you go. So, Lori, I'm with you. Thank you very much for the call. I appreciate it. Irene in Clovis, California. Hey, Irene, what's on your mind today? Irene in Clovis?
Hello?
Hey, Irene, you're on the air. What's up?
Hi, let me turn off my TV. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Irene, I'm going to put you on hold, and you can work that out with Joyce. Robin in Burlington, Vermont. Hey, Robin, what's on your mind today?
Wow, this is fantastic. I've tried to get on your show so often, and I've always had a busy signal. Yeah, this is my first time. I like your show, but I'm worried about the direction that you're promoting. It seems to me that in Ukraine, it's a civil war, that it's whatever it is, a fourth of the people are Russian-speaking or maybe a fifth or whatever. And there was something called the Minsk Agreements, and that Biden has made a disastrous turn against Russia by not encouraging Zelensky to support the Minsk Accords, and all of this could be settled without this terrible war that's happened, that's traumatizing millions of children throughout Ukraine.
It's not just traumatizing, it's murdering and raping millions of children across Ukraine.
Yes,
Russian soldiers inside Ukraine. So what do you think Zelensky should do? Just say, okay, Putin, take the country?
Okay, that's what a friend of mine said. Negotiations are appeasement.
I'm asking what, Putin has said he wants the entire country. That's his negotiating position. What do you think Zelensky should do?
Okay, I think Putin has lost, and Zelensky has obviously won the moral fight. That Putin is waiting maybe for May 9th or whatever it is to declare he needs to be given off-ramps. As long as we demonize our opponent, we will be pushing him more and more into a hole. What he has done is totally horrible, disastrous, and everything. But we, the United States and Zelensky, are going to have to. There will have to be a peace settlement at the end. And to think that Russia, the great Russia bear, will give in and continue to be insulted and demonized, I think is a disaster, and that it will flash back on Biden, because he's bringing us into a war that we don't know what the end will be, and he certainly lost my vote in his unwillingness to support the Minsk Accords. And
what do the Minsk Accords say, Robin?
They require the people on both sides in those two provinces to step away from their hostility and to allow a autonomous region to be negotiated.
And that was resolved, and Ukraine was declared a standalone country. And now you want to back away from that?
An autonomous region would mean that it would still be part of Ukraine in some way, but that they would have their own language, and they would have that's what would have to be negotiated.
The Minsk agreements were a series of international agreements that sought to end the war in the Donbas region. The Minsk Protocol, this is from 2014. And the agreement failed to stop the fighting. Then you had the Minsk II in February of 2015, and that was basically a ceasefire. And but none of this, I mean, nowhere in the Minsk, from what I'm reading, and I'll confess, I'm not an expert on the Minsk Protocol, but number one, here's the text of the protocol. It has 12 points. Number one, to ensure an immediate bilateral ceasefire. Well, that didn't happen. Russia has continued fighting and infiltrating soldiers into the Donbas region ever since this was signed, number one. So Russia has been violating that. Number two, to ensure the monitoring and verification of the ceasefire.
Who says they've been infiltrating?
Pretty much every news source in the world. I mean, Russia's not denying that. Number two, to ensure the monitoring and verification by the OSCE. Well, you can't even get into that region, in large parts of that region now, because Russia has seized control of it. Number three, decentralization of power. I don't see that happening. It's being consolidated by Russia. Number four, to ensure the permanent monitoring of the Ukrainian-Russian border and verification by the OSCE. The OSCE being the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Well, the OSCE has been kicked out of that region by Russia. So that is not happening. Number five, the immediate release of all hostages and illegally detained persons. I have no idea if that happened or not, but that was back, 12 or 7 years ago. Number six, a law preventing the prosecution and punishment of people in connection with the events. Obviously, that has been, to the best of my knowledge, nobody has been prosecuted. Number seven, to continue a national dialogue. Number eight, to improve the humanitarian situation in Donbass. Again, I don't see that that's happening. Number nine, and it's not happening because of Russia. Number nine, to ensure early elections in accordance with Ukrainian law. That definitely has not happened. Russia has prevented that from happening. Number 10, to withdraw illegally armed groups and military equipment, as well as fighters and mercenaries from the territory of Ukraine. In other words, Russia has to pull back their soldiers. They have definitely violated the Minsk agreement in regard to that. Number 11, to adopt a program of economic recovery and reconstruction for the Donbass region. There's nothing like that happening. Russia is preventing that. And number 12, to provide personal security for participants in the consultations. So the Minsk agreement obviously is gone. I mean, it's gone. Russia has violated, and I was just able to count of the 11 points or 12 points. Russia has violated almost every single one of them, Robin. So, saying let's go back to the Minsk agreement is just, again, Russian propaganda. This is BS. It's 48 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. Joe in Rutherfordton, North Carolina. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Well, that's a hard one to say. Yeah, I was born in 1941. I don't remember that war, but I remember the Korean War.
Okay.
It was a police action, just about what Putin says he's doing. It says it's a police action, a war, all but this name, under the auspices of the UN. And our State Department coordinated all the fighting.
So,
and there were 16 countries involved, and China was, by that time, I think China was a communist country already, but they weren't in the UN. We recognized Formosa.
That's right.
And
what we now call Taiwan.
Yeah. And so that's, I'm an amateur radio operator, call sign KK4RB, and I've had a lot of contacts with countries in the Soviet Union back to the 1980s, early 80s, in contest. And Ukraine was very, very big on contesting. So was the Soviet Union's nations and satellite nations.
Back in the 60s when I was a ham operator, getting a QSL card from the Soviet Union was like the biggest of the big deals.
I've got some now, and what I was getting back in those days from Poland and from Russia would be a letter sometimes. Sometimes they would ask for money.
Yeah.
Sometimes they would just want to chit-chat and letter with their QSL card. But it's a crime what's happening in Ukraine. We saw in the Navalny last night, my wife and I.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Yeah, we were really enthralled by it. And that gives you some idea of what Russia's was like then, and that's pretty close to the present.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, they don't tolerate any disagreement, evidently, within their country.
So as a historian, are you a professional historian, Joe, or you?
Well, I taught history in a community college in eastern Kentucky.
Okay, so you're a professional historian. As a historian, it's increasingly looking to me like if we're trying to draw parallels between what's going on in Europe right now and previous conflicts, at least in our lifetimes, and I'll include yours because you were born before, the year the United States entered World War II. It seems to me that the only analog that has any accuracy at all is, Hitler going into Poland. It's World War II. That every war since then, the war that you were just talking about a moment ago in Korea, the first Iraq War, Vietnam, the first Iraq War, the second Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, that none of those wars are analogous to this. What say you?
Well, North Korea invaded South Korea. That's true. Mm-hmm. But no, this is a lot like what Hitler was doing. I think Putin is acting so much like Hitler that it's silly and stupid for him to call all the Ukrainians Nazis. There is a small extreme right-wing party in the country, but it's not. It doesn't
as there
dominate.
is in every country. We
right.
have
and
one here
too. Our country, France, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, this is my sense of it, and it's something that I've been avoiding confronting, honestly, myself, not just on the air, but I've been avoiding, trying to come to some sort of a conclusion about what's going on. But it just really seems to me that we are in that 1939 moment that Poland has been invaded. I mean, not literally. Now it's Ukraine, but in the next door neighbor to Poland. Joe, thank you so much for the call. It's nice to hear from you, and I appreciate your historical perspective. It's 52 minutes past the hour. We'll be back in just a moment, right after I read an ad here on the commercial side. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back. 53 minutes past the hour. Brian in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind today?
I think people forget that Putin is like John Gotti. It's John Gotti with an intelligence service, a large military, and nuclear weapons. And that's his morality level. This is a very, very delicate situation. People don't realize how fast things would escalate. If we were to get into a shooting war with the Russians, our doctrine is we attack command and control and all their radar and satellites, and they would do the exact same thing to us. And studies have shown in wargaming and whatnot, and believe me, the Pentagon has all kinds of plans for fighting the Russians, that as soon as one side starts to lose, the nuclear weapons come out. And then it's Katie bar the door. And then it escalates super fast.
I understand.
So you could have a couple planes shot down this afternoon, and if things went really fast, you could have nuclear weapons going off tomorrow morning. And then it would be the story of humanity would change forever. That's how fast it goes.
Assuming now you're making an assumption here, Brian, that I'm not confident is a safe assumption, and that is that it's going to go to transatlantic, major, all-out, mutually assured destruction kind of nuclear war. And I'm guessing that there's, and again, I realize the stakes here are insane, right? We're talking about possibly sterilizing the entire planet. But I'm guessing that there's a whole bunch of steps that are going to happen before that, even once a nuclear weapon has been exploded. And, starting with battlefield nukes. I mean, that is what Putin is moving into that region, or battlefield nukes. He did that, 3 weeks ago?
Something like that. And I have full confidence in our military professionals, and that's why I'm happy as heck that Biden is in the presidency, because I think he is smart enough to listen to the experts. And just like I said at the start, our enemy decision maker is John Gotti. That's how we got to think of this man. Too many Americans think of him as just another world leader, like he's the king of Germany or something. He's a ruthless criminal who's murdered hundreds of thousands of people to get where he is.
And apparently delights in it.
And Russian mentality, they don't think anything of sacrificing their own troops. I mean, the Russians, they sacrificed 2 million casualties just to take Berlin at the end of the war. Germany was on its knees, and Stalin still sent in his army.
I think you could have argued that they viewed that as an existential threat to the Republic, which is how Putin is trying to sell this now to his own people. You take me down, you're taking Russia down. I am Russia, right? That's his sales pitch, basically.
Which is a con, and I think our smart strategy that we're using is to just slowly bleed the the Russian army, try and protect as many Ukrainian civilians as possible, and then hope for some political change in Russia, because this war is going to be a disaster. I mean, I heard one analyst, Russia could turn into a failed state, because if Russia loses the war, Putin loses, and then what comes next? And then you have this huge country with a shrinking demographic, with all the oil and the minerals and the timber.
Right.
So who's going to go in there next?
Right. Well, in my mind, the best hope is that the people of Russia, that somebody close enough to Putin to end this ends it. And I realized that just a couple of weeks ago there was some conversation about that, and everybody got their fur up in the air, as it were. But anyway, Brian, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.
Today we're reading from Dorfman and Mallart's book, How to Read Donald Duck, Imperialist Ideology in the Disney Comic. And this is from the preface to the English edition. This book was first published in Spanish. To say that this book was burnt in Chile should not come as a surprise to anyone. Hundreds of books were destroyed and thousands more prohibited and censored. It was written in the middle of 1971, in the middle of the Chilean revolutionary process. Copper had been rescued, the land was being returned to the peasantry, the whole Chilean people were recovering the industries that during the 20th century had been the means of enrichment for Mr. Rockefeller, Grace, Guggenheim, and Morgan. Because this process was intolerable to the United States government and its multinational corporations, it had to be stopped. They organized a plan which at the time was suspected and since has been confirmed by Mr. Kissinger, Ford, and Colby to have been directed and financed by the United States intelligence services. Their objective was to overthrow the constitutional government of Chile. To realize their objective, an invisible blockade was imposed. Credits were denied, spare parts purchased for industrial machinery were not sent, and later the Chilean state bank accounts in the U.S. were blocked, and an embargo preventing the sale of Chilean copper throughout the world was organized. There were, however, two items which were not blocked: planes, tanks, ships, and technical assistance for the Chilean armed forces, and magazines, TV serials, advertising, and public opinion polls for the Chilean mass media, which continued for the most part to be in the hands of a small group which was losing its privileges. To maintain them with those of the U.S., their media prepared the climate for the bourgeois insurrection, which finally materialized some years later on the 11th of September, 1973. Each day, with expert U.S. advice, in each newspaper, each weekly, each monthly magazine, each news dispatch, each movie, and each comic book, their arsenal of psychological warfare was fortified. In the words of General Pinochet, the point was, quote, to conquer the minds, end quote, while in the words of Donald Duck in the magazine Dislandia, published in December 1971, coinciding with the first mass rallies of native fascism, the so-called March of the Empty Pots and Pans, the point was to, quote, restore the king. But the people did not want the restoration of the king, nor of the businessman. The popular Chilean cultural offensive, which accompanied the social and economic liberation, took multiple forms: wall paintings, popular papers, TV programs, motion pictures, theater, songs, literature. In all areas of human activity, with differing degrees of intensity, the people expressed their will. Perhaps the most important arm of this offensive was the work of the state publishing house, Quimantu, a word meaning sunshine of knowledge in the language of the Chilean Machupe Indians. In 2.5 years, it published 5 million books, twice the amount that had been published in all of Chile during the previous 70 years. In addition, it transformed the content of some of the magazines it had inherited from before the popular unity government and created new ones. It is in this multifaceted context, with the people on the march to cultural liberation, a process which also meant criticizing the mass cultural merchandise exported so profitably by the U.S. into the Third World, that How to Read Donald Duck was generated. We simply answered a practical need. It was not an academic exercise. For the Mad Dog Warriors on that September 11th, there were no paintings on the walls. There were only enormous stains which dirtied the city in memory. They, using the fascist youth brigades, whitewashed all the signing, many-colored walls of the nation. They broke records, murdered singers, destroyed radios and printing presses, imprisoned and executed journalists, so that nothing would be left to remind anybody of anything about the struggle for national liberation. But it was not enough to clean these cultural stains from the street. The most important task was to eliminate all those who bore the stain inside themselves: the fighters, workers, peasants, employees, students, and patriotic soldiers, to eliminate these creators of a new life, to eliminate this new life which grew, and for all that we created. This book, conceived for the Chilean people and our urgent needs, produced in the midst of our struggle, is now being published far from Chile in the uncle land of Disney, behind the barbed wire network of ITT. Mr. Disney, we are returning your duck, feathers plucked and well roasted. Look inside, you can see the handwriting on the wall, our hands still writing on the wall, Donald, go home. This is written in 1975. And then this from David Kunzel's introduction. The names of the presidents change. That of Disney remains. 46 years after the birth of Mickey Mouse, 8 years after the death of his master, Disney's may be the most widely known North American name in the world. He is arguably the century's most important figure in bourgeois popular culture. He has done more than any single person to disseminate around the world certain myths upon which that culture has thrived, notably that of an innocence supposedly universal, beyond place, beyond time, and beyond criticism. The myth of U.S. political innocence is at last being dismantled, and the reality which it masks lies in significant areas exposed to public view. But the great American dream of cultural innocence still holds a global imagination in thrall. The first major breach into the Disney of this dream was made by Richard Schickel's The Disney Version, The Lifetimes and Commerce of Walt Disney, the book How to Read Donald Duck.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll get back to, welcome back to the third hour of our program, by the way. We will get back to our conversation about war and peace in just a few moments. But I first wanted to bring on my old friend and colleague, Ari Rabin-Havt. He's the former deputy campaign manager for Bernie Sanders 2020, the former host of the show The Agenda right here on Sirius XM, the author of The Fighting Soul on the Road with Bernie Sanders. This is a brand new book, and it's an absolutely amazing story. It starts out in Ari's living room. Ari, welcome back to the program. It's been a while since we've talked. I'm curious your thoughts on how America has changed just really in the last 5 years, I would say. You had the Hillary Clinton campaign arguing that the things that Bernie Sanders was calling for in the primary 5 years ago were never going to happen, impossible. And now many, if not most of those things, they've been held up by Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema and every single Republican, but they are widely embraced by the President of the United States and the Democratic Party. How did this happen?
I mean, Tom, you remember a few years back, you and I used to chat about all those deficit hawks who we couldn't spend any money on this, we couldn't spend any money on that. And you're right. Look, Joe Manchin's going to hold things up, but you have a Democratic Party willing to have a child tax credit that literally sends checks to people, which 4 years ago would have been impossible. And look, you look at that progress. It's not what we want. We want Medicare for all. We want college for all. We want a number of things. We want Social Security improved and expanded. But the just huge difference in what Bernie Sanders did for America, what his campaign did, how it changed the complete conversation in Washington from, hey, government can't do anything, to, hey, here are all the things government can do, even under, frankly, a conservative Democratic president like Joe Biden.
To what extent do you think that this is a function of Americans finally starting to realize, in part because Bernie was calling it out, but there's a whole bunch of variables here. And in fact, I'd love your take on what they may be. But the American people starting to finally realize that all of these right-wing billionaires who've been saying, and funding, movements from Tea Party and everything else, saying, get your government hands off my Medicare. The government can't do anything right. Government always screws it up. Bureaucrats, rah, 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 union bosses, terrible, terrible. That finally, the American people suddenly realized, oh, my God, these billionaires are getting everything they want from the government. They're being subsidized by the government. The fossil fuel industry is getting $600 billion a year from the government. The largest corporations in America are being massively subsidized by the government. Walmart comes into a community. It demands 20 years of tax abatements, massive government subsidies. And you're telling us that we can't have food stamps if we lose our job? That there, at some point the light bulb seems to have gone off, and at some point seems to, and I've been doing this show for 19 years, that some point seems in a big way to me to have been within the last 10 years for sure, going back to Bernie's first campaign, and definitely in the last 5 years. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think it was a lot of people waking up and being like, wait, government can do things. Wait, a politician can be successful saying we're going to spend more money. Wait, we can have nice things. And look, we haven't gone far enough, right? We haven't won yet. There are still people like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema holding back the Democratic Party. And by the way, that's not an excuse. I think Joe Biden, there's a lot of things more he could do, which we could talk about. But the idea that we're not even having conversations, Tom, do you remember how many conversations you and I had during the Obama years about TPP?
Oh, yeah.
Like, those conversations don't exist anymore. It is remarkable, the change that took place.
Yeah, we've gone from basically a neoliberal Democratic Party to a progressive Democratic Party. I realize there's still a bunch of neoliberals out there, but I mean, we've got a guy here in Oregon, Kurt Schrader, who's like, a stooge for big pharma. I mean, his family comes from a big pharma fortune. And has been fighting against Medicare, negotiating drug prices, for God's sake. And he's carpet bombing his district now because he's in a primary. He's running, against a real, Jamie McLeod Skinner. Thank you, Sean. He's running against a real progressive, Bernie Sanders progressive, and he's got his back though. And he's sending out these really slick flyers that are probably paid for by the pharmaceutical industry, talking about how he's a progressive and he's fighting to secure and protect your Medicare now. I mean, it's like even the neoliberals are pretending they're progressives.
And some of that is the campaign. And look, the book itself, if I can talk about it
Please.
For 1 second. It's not a policy tome. Let me state that. It is really the story. As you know, I spent pretty much 4 years on the road with Bernie Sanders every day. I got to see a Bernie Sanders that many people don't know. Your audience actually might be more familiar with Bernie than everybody else, just because you had the brunch with Bernie for a decade.
Yeah, 11 years.
But there's a Bernie that I think people don't know. There's a Bernie that people should know. Who is this person? And I really get into who is Bernie. And I have a lot of stories that even people who follow him closely will not know.
Well, share one with us.
I really hope,
if you don't mind. We're talking about Ari Rabin-Havt's new book, The Fighting Soul: On the Road with Bernie Sanders. What would you give us a taste?
Well, first, I think one story that's gotten around, but I think people will really, it helps set in context even the end of the campaign, was when Bernie went to see Barack Obama in 2018 to just discuss, hey, I'm thinking about running. He hadn't decided yet. And in the room was only Bernie, Barack Obama, and me. And at one point during the conversation, Barack Obama turned to Bernie and said, Bernie, you're an Old Testament prophet. You tell the party, you give the party kind of a moral voice, but prophets don't get to be king. Are you willing to make the choices that kings have to make? That you would, there's moments like that have never been talked about before. There's, I was in the car. The book starts out with the heart attack is kind of the first scene of the book, where it was me and only one other staffer with him throughout that period. I really kind of want to tell that story because it's a story of how resilient and how committed Bernie is to running. There's the story about the campaign, which literally the 2020 campaign began in my living room, which I happen to be sitting in right now. There's stories about Bernie's sense of humor, which is remarkable. One of my favorite stories is I got this call on my phone, and this, from somebody in LA, and they're like, Miley Cyrus is going to endorse Bernie, which she never did in this campaign, but that was the call. And it was, and I was with Bernie. He's like, what's going on? I was like, Miley Cyrus is going to endorse you. And, you don't expect Bernie to know who Miley Cyrus is. And he turns around in the car and goes, does that mean Hannah Montana will campaign in Montana for us? Okay. Just like, first off, that he knew that was remarkable. I was like, how do you know who Miley Cyrus is? And he was like, well, my grandkids, when I had to go buy them gifts, everything in the store was Hannah Montana. So I figured out who she was, which is a side of Bernie I feel like people don't get to see. There's, the what happened behind the scenes, a great story that I really love that shows the side of Bernie that people don't get to see, happened before the Detroit debate. Faz, the campaign manager, Bernie and I were sitting in his green room, and he was feeling kind of low energy. And Jeff Weaver sent us a text because we had said he looks low energy, saying, hey, read him John Delaney's press release, who sent out a press release being like, I'm going to go on stage and call Bernie a communist. And we read the press release, and Bernie turns to us and goes, do you know that Charlie Brown song? It was my favorite as a kid. Like, what are you talking about? And he looks at us, he goes, why is everybody always picking on me? And Faz, at which point, starts playing the song on his iPhone. And Bernie literally gets up and starts dancing around the room and airboxing and like gets pumped up. And to have a Bernie to the closing scene of the campaign, which kind of bookends that, where, the world is shutting down because of COVID. It's March 10th. We're in Detroit and we're supposed to fly to Ohio for a rally, but we're kind of paused on the ground because it's questionable whether that rally should take place. And we're kind of holding in Ohio, and we have like 2 hours on the campaign, which was unheard of. And we ended up at two museums. The second museum was the Motown Museum. And Bernie ends up in the original Barry Gordy recording studio, duetting on My Girl with the tour guide there. And it's the one time during the campaign, because I have numerous pictures that I took, which are in this book, by the way, a lot of pictures that I took on the road, and some other people's pictures who graciously allowed me to put their pictures in too from the campaign. Their pictures in there too, but there's a picture I took where he turned to me and goes, please take a picture of this, which was the only time he did, of him in the original Motown recording studio, because that's like the place of his youth. And there are so many scenes with Bernie like that, and I'm very happy people have said this book is not only like a factual read, but an enjoyable one.
It really and truly is. The book is The Fighting Soul, On the Road with Bernie Sanders by Ari Rabin-Havt. And Ari, brilliant work. Keep it up. Thanks for dropping by.
Thanks, Tom. Good seeing you.
Yeah, good talking to you too. And very best wishes on the book. I wish you the very best. Thanks. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So let's get back into our conversation about war and peace, Ukraine, Russia, the United States. Where do we go from here? And welcome back. Let's see here. Mark in Boulder, Colorado. Hey, Mark, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Been watching you forever. Former Bernie delegate. I've got a bit of a different perspective than most people, I think, because I used to be married to a Russian woman and, have a daughter with her, and been to Russia a couple times. And, my fear is what this is going to turn into is to showcase tactical nukes on both sides, kind of a little test to see if conventional wars can be done with tactical nuclear weapons. And, Ukraine's just going to be a radioactive wasteland after this is over, which is just awful. Just awful.
I see that as Putin's end game if he thinks he's losing. If he thinks not so much if he thinks he's losing in Ukraine. I mean, he's already suffered some significant defeats, but if he thinks that he's losing power in Russia.
I think he's going to do it. Yeah, I agree. Because the thing is we've been talking to people that are in Russia, and obviously, people there have to say they support Putin.
Right.
But for the most part, nobody does. They know what's going on, and but what's your choices? Go to jail for 15, 20 years, disappear, get poisoned. It's a bad situation. And I was in Russia, in Moscow, back when I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous, but my father-in-law, he was the vice president of the Academy of Science for Russia and Tajikistan.
Wow.
And yeah, so I met some pretty heavies when I was in Moscow and whatnot. And that was around the time when things were going private. And
this is in the early 2000s, you mean? Or late 90s?
Yes, late 90s. And, my wife's family, part of it, was lucky enough, they were in, basically, they would check things when they came into the country. Shipping and that sort of thing. And that was privatized and given to them. And obviously they've done very well. And there's some bankers and things like that. So, but even these people, they're not for this war. They see what it's doing. Sure. And so I don't know what's in Putin's head. I really don't.
Well, he wants. He thinks he's Peter the Great. It certainly seems that way to me. But if anybody in the world should have an institutional memory of the horrors of war, it should be the Russians. And I think it must be the Russians.
Yeah, and that's what I don't get. Because the other thing is when I was down there one time, I was down in Tajikistan, and because I was trying to help I used to work in medicine, and I was trying. I talked over the phone, and her grandmother was obviously in congestive heart failure, and I got a bunch of Lasix and took it over there. But I actually, wound up smuggling money out of Tajikistan for my father-in-law because it was so bad, because that country had turned into 4 Muslim sects fighting each other for control.
Oh, geez.
And you know all about Tajikistan.
I don't know a lot about it, but that makes sense. Mark, I'm sorry, I got to run.
Northern Alliance.
Yeah. Oh, the Northern Alliance. Oh, okay. It's a great story. Mark, thank you so much. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Welcome back, 21 minutes past the hour. By the way, I just wanted to quickly flag this for you. Abraham Bolden has been on this program. He is now 86 years old. He was the first African-American Secret Service agent to serve a president. And he served Jack Kennedy, and he was with Jack Kennedy throughout the 60s up until his death. And he blew the whistle on Kennedy's security, not keeping him secure. And he also blew the whistle on racist behavior inside the Secret Service. And for that, they prosecuted him. His first trial resolved in a hung jury. He was convicted in his second trial, although the main witness against him admitted that he lied because the prosecutor told him to. So Biden then tried to get a new trial. He was denied a new trial. They sent him to prison. He spent several years in federal custody. He has always maintained his innocence on this charge, that he was trying to sell a copy of a Secret Service file. There's no evidence of it. And now President Biden just pardoned him. God bless Joe Biden. The other big news story that's breaking right now is that Kamala Harris, our Vice President Harris, just tested positive for COVID. So keep your eye on this space. All righty, let's pick up your phone calls here. John in Janesville, Wisconsin, listening on WADR. Hey, John, what's up?
Thank you, Tom. Question, as you as professor of history, I bring up the name of Charles Davis, who was involved in the late 30s.
You mean Nancy's father? Reagan's wife's father?
Was he really?
Well, that's what I'm asking. You're talking to Dr. Charles Davis, right?
You're my verification on that. And is that, and being Nancy's father, and she married that.
Maybe I've got it wrong.
Grade B movie star. Is she the reason that she possibly turned him from being somewhat of a Democrat to, oh, I can't remember. I don't know anything about that, you know. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, I can't remember this and I can't remember that. Ronald Reagan had the excuse of his age, but she doesn't have that excuse.
Yeah. Let me just check here. Her personal details. Parents. Loyal Davis was her father. Kenneth Seymour Robbins was her biological father. So Charles Davis was not her father. I'm sorry, I was wrong.
But also Charles Davis, he was tied up in that coup attempt in the early 40s against FDR that received money from Germany, millions of dollars from Germany, that was later quashed. Am I not correct by Smedley Butler?
I don't know about Charles Davis, John. I do know that, yeah, that happened and it was quashed. But thank you for the call. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's on your mind?
Well, thanks for taking my call. That was fast. Wow. Two things. I tried to call you from Kentucky twice, and you may remember my phone didn't work for unknown reasons. I still have the same gripe I want to make via you for your opinion. As you know, I help moderate on the YouTube channel that you have. And I am being accused, get this, of not being for world peace, ? What? And possibly being a warmonger.
Right.
Because
I'm sure I am too.
Ukraine to be, join the, it's a good club to be a member of, I think. You know, for having been supportive of, arming Ukraine to fend off the Russian assault, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd kind of like your opinion on that in general. And then a really terrific anecdotal story about a trip to Hungary when I was 18, believe it or not. If you're ready for that, let me know when.
Yeah, no, go for. My advice, Nicholas, is just ignore the trolls. You've got people in there who have a whole variety of agendas.
Actually, these are not trolls. These are some of the very best chatters and one moderator.
Okay.
Anyway, here we go. I was 18 and I hired a really good English-speaking taxi driver in Budapest years ago. I'm talking fast. And I hired him for a half day to drive me around Budapest and sort of be my own personal gray line tour, if you will. And we ended up in a really rich, incredibly luxurious suburb of Budapest over on the Pest side. I said, and big Mercedes in the driveways, the whole thing. I mean, really outrageously big houses, 6, 8 bedroom places. I said, who lives here? And he said, this is the hierarchy of the Communist Party. I said, really? I said, how did they end up with these houses? And he said, they didn't end up with these houses. He said, they always had these houses. These are their old family estates. And he looked at me and said, you don't think simply because they call themselves communists that anything has really changed, do you?
Right. Yeah. Well, in Russia, the names changed, but the positions remained the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was quite an epiphany for an 18-year-old. That really did wake me up.
Yeah.
And I had, I was stepping into Berkeley at that point, and I was ready for any kind of an epiphany, but wow, that one hit home hard.
There you go. So, Nicholas, thank you.
I appreciate your advice on the ignore the... they're not trolls, unfortunately. It's some other people.
Well, hopefully we can all disagree. I'm not saying, hey, let's go in there with nuclear weapons and fight the Russians. I'm very much not saying that. As I said before, the best outcome on this is that Russia takes out Putin. You know, the Russians take him out themselves. But we'll see. Nicholas, I got to run. Thanks.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Or Ukraine can push him out, and that's the end of that. That's going to take a hell of a lot more effort.
For today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of deja vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate. The offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump Business Organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump Organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We have come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development and infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
Remember Paul Manafort? He used to be business partners with Roger Stone back in the day, working for Republican politicians like, Nixon and Reagan. Well, in 2004, he took a really sweet gig over in Ukraine, helping the Russians, President Putin, install Viktor Yanukovych as the president of Ukraine, a nice Putin puppet. That same year, though, the people of Ukraine said enough, and basically Yanukovych got driven out of the country. So they tried it again in 2010. Let's bring, this Putin puppet back into Ukraine, Yanukovych. And it worked until 2014 when they got kicked out. So he gets kicked out of Ukraine, Manafort. So what does he do the next year, 2015? He decides to run the Trump campaign. Are you starting to see a pattern here? Yeah, could be. Okay, there's an entire video that outlines this whole timeline over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. 35 minutes past the hour. Welcome back and to our conversation here about what's going on and how and where and how it might play out. And John in Medford, you're on the air. John, what are your thoughts?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I had a couple of thoughts about the Ukraine, but I have to point out your discussion of Poland, just from an historical standpoint and kind of understanding why those countries in Eastern Europe have the views that they do. It's really important to remember that it wasn't just Hitler that invaded Poland in 1939. He had an agreement with Stalin where he took the western half of Poland and Stalin invaded the eastern half of Poland and essentially occupied it. The agreement that Hitler and Stalin had also basically divvied up Eastern Europe, where the Baltic states were given to Stalin as well. So they have a lot of really good reasons to be wary of Russia, just because of that history, going back to how World War II started. So I think that's important to remember too. But what I was thinking, and this is why I called in, was I could totally see how we would get involved in Ukraine by establishing a no-fly zone over western Ukraine. You could almost draw a line from Kyiv to down to Odessa, where there's really no land action anymore. They're bombing and sending missiles in, but there doesn't seem to be any thinking that there's going to be land conflict in western Ukraine. And it's easy for me to see how we might say, okay, a no-fly zone in western Ukraine, not extend it over into the Donbass and where all of the ground action is going on. But it's easy for me to see how that might be how it starts, with us essentially going in saying Ukraine's a sovereign country. They've asked for our help, and we're going to do this in Western Ukraine. And to be honest with you, even though we're all afraid of World War III, I grew up during the Cold War in the 1980s and am aware of the history. And we can't be afraid. We can't make our decisions just always based on fear. We stood up to the Russians in Berlin and over Cuba and a lot of other places, and we weren't afraid to take some chances, to protect the West and to protect democracy. I think it's a mistake for us to basically be afraid to say to the Russians, hey, this is the way it is. If this is the way you want to play it, then we're going to play it this way too. And, kind of at least stand up to them that way. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I just wondered what you were thinking about a no-fly zone, maybe a limited one.
I think your observations are spot on, trenchant. I would add that I think that establishing the embassy, look at the embassy politics in Israel. Embassy politics are huge. And we are because an embassy is foreign territory. It is your territory. The United States is going to claim when we install an ambassador in Ukraine, and hopefully the Republicans will not block her confirmation in the U.S. Senate, although the fact that she's already been confirmed to be the ambassador to Slovenia may grease the skids on this. I don't know how that works, frankly. I believe she has to be approved, as it were, but
never underestimate their ability to do the wrong thing.
Right, Republican perfidy is there are books written about it. In fact, I've written books about it. But the point is that once we say, and I realize we have an embassy building there, and it's technically U.S. property, but nonetheless, once there's an ambassador there, were we to say we feel that this territory of the United States, this embassy in Ukraine, is now being threatened, and so we're going to impose a no-fly zone, at least over Kyiv, where the embassy is.
And I could also see in that scenario where we would say we have the absolute right to fly planes into Kyiv. We have diplomats, we have trade there, and we have it's a free country still for so far. And we have a right to fly into that airport and supply our people, get our people in and out. Right. And that in and of itself would require an enormous security effort in terms of being able to get our airplanes in and out. I think be a no-fly zone.
Yeah, I think originally when Joe Biden was saying, and I remember when he said this to a reporter, who just asked him, and he said, well, yeah, we put an American pilot in there, and suddenly we're shooting at the Russians, and now, boom, you've got World War III. I think that at that point in time, our government did not believe that the Ukrainian government could withstand the Russian assault. And we were just trying to let it get done with and mourn it and move on. And now it's obvious that that's not going to happen. And so, this is the old Winston Churchill thing. America always does the right thing after it's exhausted all the other options. That seems like that's the way we're going. John, thank you for the call. Very thoughtful analysis. Will in Broomfield, Colorado. Hey, Will, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, talking about war, I wanted to refer you to a book written in 1979. It's called The Third World War by General Sir John Hackett, former NATO general. He served he was British, and he wrote a novel, and he got a lot of other experts in there talking about a war between NATO and the Warsaw Pact in August of 1985. And
this was when the Soviet Union was still the Soviet Union.
Yeah, and I remember reading it, but I also remember reading that a lot of the problems the Soviet Union faced at that time are starting to see now. They tried this large blitzkrieg offensive into West Germany. This is what I remember in the novel. 30, 40 years. In the novel, yes. But NATO resistance was stronger than expected, and a lot of the resistance from the local population was stronger than expected. And so the expected Russian dominance in the air and land didn't materialize as quickly as they had to. And so the upshot is, in a matter of just a few weeks, there was a nuclear exchange. As I recall, the USSR launched a missile against Birmingham, England. NATO retaliated against Minsk. And at that point in the novel, Soviet generals said enough's enough, and they basically staged a coup to stop the war from escalating at that point.
Wow.
But I'm seeing a lot of similar dynamics playing out here. And remember, Putin was a Soviet operative. He was a Soviet born and raised, and a lot of the tactics that he is using now, I remember these are old Soviet tactics, and I remember reading them in this book. Mm-hmm. And so we're just kind of, this has been discussed before, mm-hmm. and like I said, I just wanted to call your attention to it. It's available on Amazon. Apparently, it's very, very expensive and rare right now. For some reason, it might be a hot topic, but it's called The Third World War, August 1985. General Sir John Hackett and others are the
fascinating. Well, thank you. And thanks for sharing that. It's fascinating. Zeke in Portland. Hey, Zeke, what's up?
Well, you had a guy on earlier this morning named Brian, and he did, with guys like Brian out there, you don't even need Sergei Lavrov, who was waving the nuclear blackmail thing again yesterday. Mr. Brian said that if we shoot down a Russian aircraft in the morning, you'll have Armageddon in the evening. I mean, he exactly said that. And Biden, who he is a big fan of, who I am not a big fan of, has a word for that kind of thing. It's called malarkey. It's pure malarkey. And here's the thing, Tom. Two things. The Russians and Putin are many things, principally evil. They are not, however, suicidal, right. Number one. Number two, you have to explain to me, Brian has to explain to me, maybe you, I don't know, if the shoe fits, whatever. How is it? Biden has said, more than one occasion, we will defend every inch of NATO territory. How does the nuclear blackmail magically disappear when the Russians invade one of the Baltic states, which if they get to where I think they're going in Ukraine, the Baltics are next. How does the nuclear blackmail magically disappear when they invade a NATO country? And if it's not valid then, how is it valid now?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
We have spent my entire lifetime scared to death that, we're going to bring down the entire world with a nuclear war, the nuclear missile exchange, and everything is going to be turned into a crisp and mutually assured destruction and all that. And, I think at some level that's being reconsidered. It's weird to even talk like this. I mean, it's just even thinking like this is... Anyhow, Zeke, thank you very much for the call. Spot on. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll continue with the conversation on the other side of this break. Stick around. And welcome back. Steve in Little Rock, Arkansas. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks a lot. I seem to recall listening to your show about a month ago, maybe that long ago, that you had spent some time doing research or studying in Kaliningrad. Am I remembering right?
I wasn't. I was working there, yes.
Okay. When was that?
It was 96, I think.
What was it like then?
It was, I could be wrong on the year, but it was right around in there. It was in the mid-90s. The country, Kaliningrad, is kind of a city in a little region that is separate from the rest of Russia. And it had been a top security port, area. It had been one of these special military zones. That was kind of all abandoned. When we flew in, there was one person in the airport who was doing security. The city was just beginning to awaken from the fall of the Soviet Union, as it were. There were little kiosks all around the city that were, thrown together out of plywood and stuff, where people were selling vodka and selling all kinds of stuff. There were no stores there. I mean, there were stores, but there were no signs. I couldn't find any restaurants. it was a real interesting time to be there. Why do you ask?
Was this in Königsberg?
Yeah, it used to be called Königsberg. It's one of those areas that went back and forth between Russia and Germany over and over again.
Well, are they is this to Russia like Hawaii is the United States, or are they
sort of? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, except and it's there because it has military and security significance. So anyhow, thanks a lot for the call, Steve. Rudy in Atlanta. Hey, Rudy, what's on your mind?
You know, Tom, I'm sitting here looking at this, and, you know, I served in the military. My daughter's in the military. My brother retired. My dad. This is what being American about, being American. This is what it's about, standing for something. If there was ever a time that I really felt like, hey, it's going to be what it's going to be, this is that time. You know, Tom, I think, you know, we're at a reset in this country, and it's nothing, you know, this country has its ups and downs, but it's nothing wrong with trying to be righteous. There's nothing wrong with trying to be right. You know, everyone has a turn at this, but Tom, it's nothing wrong with trying to turn things around and to put the right things in order. We have to try to keep this thing simple. I don't think this is complicated. We see what's going on. Let's just try to be righteous about it. And timing is everything. So I think we're at a reset. So let's just do what is necessary by all means. And let's stand for something.
Yeah, and the American people typically stand up for what they believe is right, which is why Lyndon Johnson had to convince us that in the Gulf of Tonkin, I forget the name of the ship, but that the ship had been blown up. It's why, you know, which it turned out to be a lie. That McNamara had been telling LBJ for 2 weeks. It's why George Bush the elder had to convince us that those evil Saddam Hussein soldiers were throwing babies out of incubators, which turned out to be a lie. It's why his son, George W., had to convince us that weapons of mass destruction were about to be used against us from Iraq, which turned out to be a lie. But when it's the truth, you know, like in World War II, and frankly, I think right now in Ukraine, the American people will stand up, Rudy. I really think they will. Rudy, thank you for the call. You know, we'll be right back. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. 27 Republican senators sent a letter to the Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, echoing talking points that the American Petroleum Institute pushed out on Twitter recently, saying that basically if we're going to stop importing Russian oil into the United States, which, by the way, the Russian oil imports into the U.S. are just a trickle. It's just a tiny drop in the bucket. If we're going to stop doing that, we need to, and these are some quotes from the API Twitter, we need to unleash America's energy. We need to release permits for energy development on federal lands. We need to issue offshore leasing plans for the next 5 years. We need to accelerate energy permitting infrastructure. We need to reduce regulatory and legal uncertainty. Right. It's a scam. And these 27 Republican senators are owned by the big fossil fuel companies because the Supreme Court allowed it with their Citizens United decision. We have to do something about this. There's a whole video rant about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Okay, Michael in Chicago. Hey, Michael, you want to say...
Hi, how you doing?
Good, good. What's on your mind?
I'm just trying to say, please slow down about the running to war, banging the drum to war. You know who pays the price of war? Who's going to pay the price of war? It's the Ukrainians, and it's the American servicemen that have been there. As a Vietnam veteran, I'm opposed to any war.
Okay.
And
I get
people
it.
like you.
So you think that Ukraine should just say, okay, Russia, come on in?
This is a thing between Russia and Ukraine.
Right. Okay. So you think that Russia should just take over Ukraine?
We're prolonging the conflict there. We could stop it tomorrow if we want.
By just giving Ukraine to Russia?
We want, because the military-industrial complex.
Aren't you concerned, Michael?
More money, there's no more war for them.
I want to be very clear here. I am not advocating for war in Ukraine, or for the United States getting involved in war in Ukraine. That's not what I'm saying. I think the best outcome of this thing is that Putin gets bled so badly, or Russia gets bled so badly, that Russians kick out Putin. That's, in my mind, that's the best outcome. But my question to you, Michael, if you could stop yelling at me, my question to you is, after we say to Russia, okay, fine, you can have Ukraine. You don't have to kill any more people. You don't have to rape any more women. You can just have the whole damn country. What do we do when Putin then says, okay, thank you very much for Ukraine. Now I want Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland? What do we do?
I don't know, but all I've heard, I've been listening to this stuff for the last 30 minutes. All I heard is guys are sitting in their mother's basement telling you different scenarios that we can do. Yeah. Nobody has called in from a war zone. You're right on that. Michael, I get it. And I have literally spent my whole life opposed to war. This is a extraordinarily difficult conversation. Sharon in San Marcos, California. Hey, Sharon, what's up?
Hi, Tom. You get these guys, not this guy, but other guys who call in with Putin's talking point about NATO being so close.
Or a Minsk agreement stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why he's going into Ukraine, right? Well, if he takes Ukraine and Moldova, NATO's going to be even closer. So that is not logical. That's the talking point, right? It makes no sense. If he's trying to not want NATO up against his borders, why is he taking Ukraine?
Well, and I think Rama's point that this is not NATO moving east. This is countries trying to move west, essentially, trying to adhere themselves to Western values, to Western Europe by joining NATO.
Yeah, but is he worried about NATO, or is he just, like you said before, he's just trying to get back his old Soviet Union back?
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't have to say it. Putin himself said it. So, yeah.
Right. And I don't think but that talking point about, well, NATO was right next to him and all this kind of stuff, that makes no sense, because if he takes Ukraine, NATO is going to be even closer. And so he obviously doesn't want those countries to go west, like you said. Yeah. No, this is about putting the band back together. Sharon, thank you very much. Larry in Sonoma, California. Hey, Larry, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. I was thinking about this, and I'm kind of like you. I was really anti-war and did put a lot of thought into the Vietnam War because of my age. So what I see here, and what I'd like to hope that's been done by our government, that when Biden went to Europe, he went there to approach him with the history of what's gone there. Yes, we gave the Soviet Union a lot of territory after World War II because we thanked them for World War II and felt they deserved it, and we didn't want to prolong another war over territory.
Right. We didn't want to go to war with Stalin.
Yeah. So I hope that's out there, and that they've decided, whoever he's talked to, NATO, European Union, whatever, has said, here's the history. We had the Budapest Accords. You've broken that. It looks like it's like World War II is after assets that Ukraine has. It has the wheat and the factories that are working. Right. So, yes, Soviet Union broke down. We're sorry that didn't work out. These countries have now been independent and working well independently. So whether he's scared of democracy, that is not what it's about. We hopefully that the international theme will have it all down, and then that eventually, when they cross the line, tactical nuke or whatever it is, or go after a city or more of the massacring, that say that's it, If you don't turn your tanks around, if you don't turn your troops around...
Larry, I'm going to stop you right there because I'm sorry, I'm out of time. Thank you so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, get out there, get active, as Alexei Navalny said. Tag your it. And have a great afternoon. We'll continue the conversation tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects, too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.